The first time Evelyn Carter saw Blackwood Manor, lightning split the sky directly behind it. For one suspended moment, the great house stood against the storm like something carved from another century. Cold stone, towering windows, endless shadows. It did not look like the sort of place where laughter survived for very long. The carriage slowed as rain hammered against the roof hard enough to rattle the wood beneath her fingertips. Outside, the iron gates groaned open. 2 lanterns flickered beside them like watchful eyes in the dark. Evelyn tightened her grip on the worn leather gloves in her lap. The gloves had once belonged to her mother. The seams had been repaired so many times that the stitches no longer matched. Across from her, Aunt Beatrice folded a letter with visible satisfaction. "You should smile when you arrive," she said without looking up. "A future duchess ought to appear grateful." Evelyn turned toward the rain-streaked window instead of answering. Grateful. The word settled heavily in her chest. She was 26 years old. Too old, according to London society, to still be unmarried. Too sensible to attract charming men. Too poor to reject the proposal that had arrived 6 weeks earlier with the Blackwood seal pressed into dark wax. Duke Sebastian Blackwood required a wife. Not romance, not affection. A wife. The arrangement had shocked half of London because the Duke had refused every ambitious mother and every glittering debutante for nearly 5 years. Since the death of his Duchess, he had become something close to a ghost among the aristocracy. He attended Parliament, managed his estates, raised 2 children inside a manor that society described in whispers. Cold, silent, haunted by grief. Evelyn had heard every rumor. The Duke rarely smiled. The children frightened away governesses. No woman remained at Blackwood Manor for long. "You still have time to panic," Aunt Beatrice said dryly. "That would at least be a normal reaction." Evelyn exhaled softly. "I am already panicking." Her aunt laughed under her breath. "Good. It means you are intelligent." Another flash of lightning illuminated the countryside beyond the carriage windows. Vast fields stretched into darkness beneath the storm. The Blackwood estate seemed endless. Even the trees looked severe, their black branches twisting in the wind like skeletal hands. Evelyn remembered the first time she had read the Duke's proposal. There had been no poetry in it, no declarations, no promises of happiness. Only precise arrangements written in elegant handwriting. Suitable marriage, stability for the children, respectable companionship, financial protection for Miss Evelyn Carter and her remaining family obligations. It had sounded less like a proposal and more like a treaty between strangers. Yet she had accepted within 3 days. Her father's debts had nearly destroyed them after his death. Their townhouse in Bath had been sold the previous winter. Her younger brother was studying law in Boston because Evelyn had quietly sacrificed almost everything else to keep him there. Marriage to a duke had not been her dream. Survival rarely resembled dreams. The carriage lurched suddenly over uneven stone. Aunt Beatrice glanced toward the front window with annoyance. This road could break a person's spine. Evelyn barely heard her. Blackwood Manor was closer now. Towering walls emerged through the rain. Warm light glowed faintly behind several windows, though most of the house remained swallowed by darkness. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress protecting itself from the world. The carriage finally stopped beneath a massive stone archway. Before the driver could open the door, thunder rolled overhead with enough force to shake the ground. Aunt Beatrice muttered something unladylike under her breath. Evelyn forced herself to breathe steadily. This was happening. In less than a week, she would marry one of the most powerful men in England. A man she had only met once for exactly 20 minutes in a crowded drawing room. She remembered almost nothing from that meeting except his eyes. Gray, calm, entirely unreadable. The carriage door opened. Rain-scented air rushed inside immediately. The footman bowed. "Miss Carter, welcome to Blackwood Manor." Evelyn stepped carefully onto the wet stone. Her boots splashed lightly against rainwater gathering near the steps. Wind tugged at her cloak. Above her, the manor rose into darkness with intimidating grandeur. Tall windows, sharp rooftops, Endless corridors hidden behind glass and shadow. The front doors opened before she reached them. An older butler stood waiting inside with rigid posture and silver hair. "Miss Carter," he said formally. "Her ladyship is expecting you." Her ladyship, not the Duke. The phrase sent an odd chill through her stomach. Evelyn followed him into the entrance hall. Warmth wrapped around her instantly, though it did little to soften the atmosphere. The hall was magnificent. Marble floors gleamed beneath towering chandeliers. A curved staircase swept upward beneath enormous portraits framed in gold. Candlelight flickered across polished wood and dark velvet curtains. Every inch of the manor whispered wealth and history. Yet despite the beauty, the house felt strangely empty. Too quiet. Evelyn heard no music, no laughter, no movement except the distant crackling of fireplaces hidden somewhere deeper inside the estate. Even the servants moved with unnatural softness, as though loud sounds were forbidden here. Aunt Beatrice removed her gloves slowly. "Good heavens," she murmured. "This place feels like a cathedral." The butler's expression did not change. "The Dowager Lady Blackwood is waiting in the blue drawing room." Evelyn nodded politely and followed him across the hall. Her footsteps echoed faintly against the marble. As they passed the grand staircase, she became aware of something unusual. Someone was watching her. The feeling was immediate and unmistakable. Evelyn looked upward instinctively. At first she saw nothing except shadows stretching across the second-floor landing. Then lightning flashed through the tall windows near the staircase. A small figure stood near the railing. A boy, perhaps 9 years old. Dark hair, pale face, sharp gray eyes startlingly familiar. He stared down at her silently from the shadows without blinking once. Evelyn stopped walking. So did he. For one strange second, the storm outside seemed to disappear entirely. The boy's expression was unreadable. Not curious, not frightened, simply watchful, like someone studying an unexpected intruder. Then another smaller figure appeared beside him. A little girl wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Her golden curls tumbled loosely over her shoulders. Unlike the boy, she looked openly curious. Her small hand gripped the railing as she leaned forward slightly. "Theo," she whispered loudly enough for Evelyn to hear. "Is that her?" The boy did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on Evelyn. Then, very quietly, he said, "I think so." The little girl tilted her head. She looked sad. Evelyn felt something tighten unexpectedly in her chest. Before she could speak, a woman's voice echoed sharply from somewhere upstairs. "Theo, Lily, bedtime." The children vanished instantly. One moment they stood there beneath the flickering storm light. The next, the landing was empty again. Evelyn stared upward a second longer. "The Duke's children," the butler explained carefully, though his voice carried a subtle tension. "Master Theodore and Lady Lily." Aunt Beatrice lowered her voice the moment they resumed walking. "Well," she murmured, "that was unsettling." Evelyn could not disagree. Yet strangely, it was not fear she felt lingering beneath her ribs. It was something else entirely. Loneliness recognized loneliness very quickly. The blue drawing room was warm compared to the rest of the manor. A fire burned brightly inside an enormous marble hearth. Heavy curtains softened the storm outside. Seated near the fire was an elegant older woman dressed in dark emerald silk with silver threaded through her hair. Lady Margaret Blackwood looked up the moment Evelyn entered. Her eyes were sharp enough to miss nothing. "Miss Carter," she said smoothly. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor." Evelyn curtsied politely. "Thank you for receiving me, Lady Blackwood." Lady Margaret studied her for several seconds before speaking again. "You survived the journey in this weather. That alone speaks well of your character." Aunt Beatrice smiled faintly. "We nearly floated here." For the first time, Lady Margaret's expression softened with amusement. "Then perhaps Blackwood Manor already owes you both tea and sympathy." Servants appeared almost instantly with silver trays and steaming porcelain cups. Evelyn accepted hers carefully. Her hands were colder than she realized. Lady Margaret gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit," Child. Evelyn obeyed. Firelight danced across the elegant room while rain battered the windows beyond the curtains. For several moments, Lady Margaret said nothing. She merely watched Evelyn over the rim of her teacup with unsettling intelligence. Finally she spoke. "You saw the children." It was not a question. Evelyn nodded carefully. "Only briefly." "And?" Lady Margaret asked. "Most people form opinions quickly." Evelyn hesitated. "They looked lonely." Silence followed her answer. Aunt Beatrice shifted slightly beside her. The older woman's gaze sharpened. "Not frightened?" Evelyn shook her head. "No." Lady Margaret leaned back slowly in her chair. Something unreadable passed across her expression. "Interesting," she murmured. Another silence settled between them. Then the older woman glanced toward the storm-dark windows. "Sebastian will not return until tomorrow evening. Parliament detained him in London." Evelyn tried not to feel relieved by the information. "I understand." "Do you?" Lady Margaret asked quietly. The fire cracked softly in the hearth. "My nephew is a good man, Miss Carter. But grief can make even good men difficult to reach." Evelyn lowered her gaze to her untouched tea. "I did not come here expecting easy happiness." "No," Lady Margaret said. "I suspect you did not." Upstairs somewhere in the vast manor, a door closed softly. Then silence returned once more. The kind of silence that seemed to live permanently inside Blackwood Manor. Evelyn suddenly realized something unsettling. Since entering the house, she had not heard a single person laugh. Evelyn slept very little her first night at Blackwood Manor. The bedroom prepared for her was larger than the entire upstairs floor of the townhouse she had grown up in. Yet the enormous chamber felt strangely hollow after midnight. Rain continued long after the clocks downstairs struck 2. Wind brushed softly against the tall windows while the dying fire painted restless shadows across the pale blue walls. At some point before dawn, Evelyn gave up pretending she would sleep at all. She rose quietly, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and crossed toward the window. Blackwood Manor rested beneath a veil of silver morning mist. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the grounds soaked and shimmering beneath weak sunlight. Endless gardens stretched beyond the eastern side of the estate. Stone paths curved through trimmed hedges and dark rose bushes still heavy with rainwater. Everything looked beautiful from a distance. Empty too. Evelyn rested one hand against the cold glass. Somewhere inside this massive house were 2 children who had watched her arrive like strangers observing an unexpected guest. She could still hear the little girl's voice in her mind. She looked sad. The observation unsettled her because it had been true. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Carter?" A maid called gently from outside the door. "Her ladyship requests breakfast at 9. "Thank you," Evelyn replied. The maid hesitated briefly. "If you require assistance dressing, I would be happy to help." Evelyn glanced toward her modest collection of traveling gowns laid neatly across the bed. "No, thank you. I can manage." The maid departed quietly. Evelyn dressed with practiced efficiency. She chose a soft gray morning gown trimmed in dark blue ribbon. Simple, respectable, nothing extravagant enough to invite comparison with the former Duchess. By the time she descended the staircase, the manor was beginning to wake around her. Servants moved through the corridors carrying trays, fresh flowers, and polished silver. Yet even during morning hours, Blackwood Manor remained subdued. Voices stayed low. Footsteps stayed careful. The entire household carried itself as though afraid to disturb something fragile. A footman guided Evelyn toward the breakfast room, but halfway there she paused. Laughter drifted faintly through an open doorway nearby. Real laughter, bright and unexpected. It startled her enough that she turned instinctively toward the sound. The doorway led to a sunroom overlooking the eastern gardens. Sunlight spilled across polished tile floors and rows of potted winter flowers. At the far end of the room stood the 2 Blackwood children. Theo balanced precariously on a chair while Lily sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by scattered playing cards. Neither child noticed Evelyn immediately. "You cheated," Lily accused with complete seriousness. Theo looked offended. "I did not." You hid the king. That is strategy. That is cheating. Evelyn bit back a smile. Theo finally noticed her standing near the doorway. His entire posture stiffened instantly. Lily turned around seconds later and gasped softly. It is you. The little girl scrambled awkwardly to her feet, nearly stepping on the cards. Theo climbed down from the chair more carefully. Unlike his sister, he regarded Evelyn with open suspicion. You are supposed to be at breakfast, he informed her. Evelyn folded her hands politely. I might say the same to both of you. Theo narrowed his eyes slightly. We already ate. Cook lets us have breakfast early if we promise not to argue, Lily explained. Theo muttered. You always argue. Only because you cheat. I do not cheat. Evelyn watched them quietly for a moment. The contrast between them fascinated her already. Theo carried himself with guarded caution unusual for a boy his age. Every expression seemed carefully controlled. Lily, meanwhile, radiated emotion openly. Curiosity danced across her face without restraint. What are your names? Evelyn asked gently, though she already knew. The little girl answered immediately. I am Lily. Theo sighed heavily. Everyone knows that, Lily. Well, she asked. Theo turned back toward Evelyn. I am Theodore Blackwood. The formality of his introduction nearly made her smile again. It is very nice to meet both of you properly. Theo studied her carefully. Are you afraid of this house? The directness of the question caught her off guard. Why would I be? Most people are, he said matter-of-factly. Lily nodded solemnly. One governess cried after dinner. Miss Holloway also cried, Theo added. But father made her cry. Lily looked impressed by the memory. Evelyn chose her next words carefully. And what exactly happened to these governesses? Theo crossed his arms. They left. Because you frightened them away? Theo did not answer. Lily smiled brightly instead. Theo put a frog in one lady's shoe. That happened once, he muttered. And another one screamed because Lily brought her a snake. Lily looked offended. It was tiny. Evelyn blinked slowly. A snake. A very small snake, Lily clarified. Theo watched Evelyn closely, almost expectantly, as though waiting for disgust or disapproval. Instead, Evelyn surprised herself by laughing softly beneath her breath. Both children froze. Theo looked genuinely startled. You are laughing, Lily whispered. Yes, Evelyn admitted. Mostly because I think the poor governess deserved warning before meeting the snake. Lily giggled instantly. Theo tried very hard not to smile. Failed. Only slightly. Evelyn noticed anyway. Before any of them could speak again, the little girl suddenly tilted her head. Do you know how to play cards? Evelyn glanced at the scattered deck on the floor. Badly. Theo's eyes narrowed with suspicion again. You are pretending. No, Evelyn said honestly. My brother once banned me from touching cards after I accidentally lost his allowance money during a game. Lily gasped in delight. Truly, truly. Theo studied her another moment. Then, to Evelyn's surprise, he crouched and began collecting the cards from the floor. You may play one round, he announced reluctantly. But Lily cheats worse than I do. I do not. You absolutely do. Evelyn hesitated. Breakfast with Lady Margaret was probably waiting already. So was the careful performance expected from a future duchess. Grace, composure, perfection. Yet something about the children standing before her made those expectations suddenly feel distant and exhausting. One round, she agreed quietly. 20 minutes later, Evelyn was losing spectacularly. You let her win, Theo accused while reorganizing the deck. I did not. You did, he insisted. Lily looked delighted with herself. I am simply gifted. Evelyn leaned back in her chair with exaggerated defeat. I have been destroyed by a 6-year-old. I am nearly 7, Lily corrected proudly. Sunlight warmed the room around them. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, Evelyn forgot to feel nervous. The children argued over rules. Lily kept stealing extra cards. Theo pretended to hate every second while secretly enjoying all of it. Felt strangely normal. Human. Alive. There you are. The sudden voice shattered the atmosphere immediately. All three turned toward the doorway. Lady Margaret stood there watching them with unmistakable surprise. Behind her, two footmen stared openly into the room. Theo straightened instantly. Lily slid several stolen cards behind her back. Lady Margaret's sharp gaze moved slowly across the scene. The cards, the sunlight, the children seated beside Evelyn. Then she spoke carefully. Theodore. Yes, Aunt Margaret? Did you invite Miss Carter to play cards? Theo shifted slightly in his seat. Perhaps. The older woman looked genuinely astonished. Evelyn suddenly understood why. Theo lowered his gaze after a moment and muttered, almost defensively, "She is not boring." Lily nodded enthusiastically. "And she laughs at the correct parts." Silence followed. One of the footmen actually looked alarmed by the statement. Lady Margaret blinked once before recovering her composure. "I see." Evelyn rose politely. "I apologize. I did not realize the time." "No," Lady Margaret said slowly, still studying the children. "I believe this is the first pleasant surprise Blackwood Manor has seen in quite some time." Theo looked uncomfortable with the attention and immediately focused on shuffling cards again. Lily simply beamed at Evelyn without hesitation. Then the little girl asked the question that changed the entire atmosphere of the room. "Will you stay?" The innocence in her voice made Evelyn's chest ache unexpectedly. She glanced toward Lady Margaret, then back toward the children. Theo did not look up from the deck in his hands, though she sensed he was listening carefully for her answer. Evelyn smiled gently. "I am here, am I not?" Lily looked satisfied immediately. Theo remained very quiet, but after several seconds, he slid one final card across the table toward the empty seat beside him. An unspoken invitation for another round. By late afternoon, Blackwood Manor had returned to silence. The brief warmth from the morning seemed to disappear room by room beneath the weight of routine and restraint. Evelyn noticed it immediately after luncheon. Servants resumed speaking in hushed tones. Footsteps softened again across polished corridors. Even the sunlight fading through the tall windows appeared muted inside the enormous estate. Yet something had changed. She could feel it in the curious glances directed toward her throughout the day. A maid nearly dropped a tray after discovering Theo voluntarily sitting beside Evelyn in the library. One of the gardeners openly stared when Lily took Evelyn's hand during their walk through the eastern greenhouse. By evening, the entire household appeared quietly unsettled by one impossible fact. The Blackwood children liked her. Evelyn was beginning to understand how unusual that truly was. "You have accomplished in one morning what 3 governesses failed to do in 2 years," Lady Margaret observed that evening while they sat together in the drawing room. Firelight glowed softly against the older woman's emerald silk gown. "I suspect the staff may soon believe you are practicing witchcraft." Evelyn smiled faintly over her teacup. Perhaps the children simply wished to be treated like children. Lady Margaret studied her for a long moment. "Most women who arrive here focus entirely on Sebastian." Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. "I have not even met the Duke properly." "No," Lady Margaret said quietly. "And yet his children already trust you." The statement lingered between them. Before Evelyn could respond, the distant sound of carriage wheels echoed faintly beyond the front courtyard. Lady Margaret went still. So did the servants near the doorway. One footman straightened almost instantly. Another moved toward the hall with sudden urgency. Evelyn felt her pulse shift unexpectedly beneath her ribs. "He has returned early," Lady Margaret murmured. Outside, horses slowed sharply against wet gravel. The sound rolled through the silent manor like the arrival of a storm everyone had anticipated. For reasons she could not explain, Evelyn suddenly remembered the first and only time she had met Duke Sebastian Blackwood. He had stood near a crowded ballroom window in London while politicians and noblemen competed for his attention. Tall, impossibly composed, entirely detached from the laughter around him. When he had spoken to her, His voice carried the calm precision of a man who measured every word before releasing it. Yet even then, she remembered sensing exhaustion beneath the elegance. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. The drawing room door opened abruptly. Theo appeared first. "Father is home," he announced, trying very hard to sound calm. Lily hurried in directly behind him with far less dignity. "Theo says I must not run downstairs when father arrives." "Because you nearly fell last time," Theo muttered. Lily ignored him completely and looked toward Lady Margaret instead. "May we greet him?" The older woman softened visibly. "Of course." Theo moved immediately toward the door. Lily followed halfway before suddenly stopping. She turned back toward Evelyn with visible hesitation. "Are you coming?" The question startled the entire room into silence. One of the maids glanced up sharply. Lady Margaret's eyebrows lifted slightly. Evelyn herself froze for half a second. Theo looked equally surprised by his sister's invitation, though he recovered quickly enough to pretend otherwise. "You do not have to," he added stiffly. "Father dislikes crowds." Lady Margaret hid what looked suspiciously like amusement behind her teacup. Evelyn carefully set down her own cup. "If your father does not mind the intrusion." Lily brightened immediately. "He will not mind." Theo looked doubtful. "He might." Nevertheless, both children waited for her beside the doorway. Evelyn followed them through the corridors toward the entrance hall while her heartbeat steadily betrayed her composure. The manor seemed even quieter now, anticipatory, almost tense. When they reached the staircase landing overlooking the front hall below, servants had already gathered discreetly along the walls. The great doors stood open against the fading evening light. Cold air swept inside carrying traces of rain and distant pine. A tall figure stepped through the entrance. Duke Sebastian Blackwood removed his gloves slowly as a footman relieved him of his dark coat. He was even more striking than Evelyn remembered. Not merely handsome, commanding. His presence altered the atmosphere of the entire hall without effort. Dark hair brushed faintly with rainwater. Broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored charcoal coat. Sharp gray eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Yet, despite the elegance, fatigue clung subtly to him. The kind born from responsibility carried too long without rest. "Father!" Lily's voice echoed brightly from the staircase before anyone else could speak. Sebastian looked upward immediately. For the first time since entering the manor, his expression changed. Not dramatically, only slightly, but the cold reserve softened at the sight of his daughter racing halfway down the staircase toward him. "Careful," he said automatically. Lily ignored the warning and reached him seconds later. Sebastian bent just enough to catch her before she lost balance on the final step. Theo descended more slowly with practiced dignity entirely inappropriate for a 9-year-old. "Good evening, father." Sebastian rested one hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. "Theo." The interaction was restrained but familiar. Protective affection hidden beneath discipline. Then Sebastian's gaze lifted beyond the children, straight toward Evelyn. The entire hall seemed to still around that single moment. Evelyn descended the remaining steps carefully while every servant in sight pretended not to watch. Sebastian studied her with unreadable calm. Not warm, not unkind, simply observant. "Miss Carter," he said finally. His voice was deep enough to settle through the room like low music. "Your Grace." Evelyn curtsied gracefully despite the sudden nervousness tightening her chest. "I trust your journey from Bath was manageable." "Yes, thank you." "And Blackwood Manor has been satisfactory?" Before Evelyn could answer, Lily interrupted brightly. "She plays cards terribly." Theo closed his eyes briefly as though exhausted by his sister's existence. A faint silence followed the statement. Sebastian looked down at Lily, then back toward Evelyn. "I see." Something shifted subtly in his expression. Not amusement exactly. Surprise, perhaps. The Duke glanced toward his son. "You allowed Miss Carter near the cards?" Theo straightened defensively. "She already knows Lily cheats." "I do not," Lily protested. Sebastian stared at both children for a long second. Then something unexpected happened. The corner of his mouth moved. Barely. A restrained flicker of amusement so brief Evelyn almost thought she imagined it. Yet the servants noticed. She knew they noticed because one maid nearly walked directly into a side table from shock. Sebastian released a slow breath and turned back toward Evelyn. "It appears you have accomplished miracles in less than 2 days. I suspect your children simply wished for company," Evelyn answered softly. His gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. Calm. Searching. Difficult to interpret. "Most adults fail to earn Theo's approval quite so quickly," he said. Theo looked horrified. "Father, was I mistaken?" Theo muttered something unintelligible beneath his breath. Lily smiled triumphantly. The atmosphere in the hall had shifted completely now. Not warm exactly, but less frozen, less guarded. Sebastian seemed aware of it too. His eyes moved slowly between his children and Evelyn with growing quiet suspicion, as though trying to understand a puzzle whose answer refused to fit his expectations. Finally he spoke again. "You must be exhausted from travel, Miss Carter. I am quite well. Even so, Blackwood Manor can be overwhelming at first." There was something oddly sincere beneath the statement. Before Evelyn could respond, Lily tugged lightly at her father's sleeve. "Father." "Yes. Miss Carter promised another card game tomorrow." Theo looked scandalized. "She did not promise. She implied." Sebastian stared at his daughter, then at Evelyn once more. "Did she?" Evelyn felt unexpected laughter threaten her composure. "I believe negotiations remain ongoing." To her astonishment, Sebastian gave the faintest huff of quiet amusement beneath his breath. Real this time. Tiny. Fleeting. But unmistakably real. The servants looked moments away from collective collapse. Theo noticed it too. His eyes widened slightly as he stared at his father. Then something softer crossed the boy's face. Hope perhaps. Dangerous, fragile hope. Sebastian straightened subtly as though remembering himself. The warmth vanished almost immediately behind controlled composure. "Dinner will be served in 1 hour," he said formally. "I trust you will join us." "Of course, Your Grace." He inclined his head politely. Then his gaze caught on something unexpected. Lily had wandered toward Evelyn during the conversation without anyone noticing. Now the little girl leaned sleepily against Evelyn's side with complete unconscious trust. Evelyn herself had not realized it until Sebastian's eyes fixed there. The hall became utterly silent. Sebastian stared at his daughter resting comfortably against a woman she had known for less than 48 hours. Something unreadable passed through his expression then. Not anger. Not disapproval. Shock perhaps. Deep enough that it momentarily stripped away every layer of practiced control. Theo noticed it too. "Lily never does that," he said quietly. No one answered him. Sebastian's gaze lifted slowly from his daughter to Evelyn's face. For one suspended moment, the distance between stranger and family felt dangerously uncertain. Then Lily yawned softly against Evelyn's shoulder, and everything changed again. Dinner at Blackwood Manor began precisely at 7 o'clock. Not a minute earlier. Not a minute later. Evelyn realized very quickly that the household revolved around routine the way churches revolved around prayer. Everything moved quietly, elegantly, and without visible disorder. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension lingered in every corridor like a draft no fire could fully warm. A maid escorted Evelyn toward the dining room shortly before the first bell rang. Candlelight flickered across endless portraits lining the walls as they walked. Generations of Blackwoods watched silently from gold frames. Stern dukes, elegant duchesses, military uniforms, pearls and velvet and unreadable expressions stretching back more than a century. Evelyn slowed unconsciously before one portrait near the end of the corridor. The woman painted there could not have been older than 25. Dark hair arranged beautifully beneath a silver comb. Calm blue eyes. Delicate features softened by an almost shy smile. The former Duchess of Blackwood. Even without introduction, Evelyn knew immediately. "Her Grace Isabella," the maid said softly beside her. "The late Duchess." Evelyn held the portrait's gaze a second longer. The woman looked kind. Very young, too. The realization left a strange ache behind Evelyn's ribs. She was beautiful, Evelyn murmured. The maid lowered her eyes. Yes, miss. Nothing else was added. Yet silence itself revealed enough. The household still belonged to this woman somehow. Her absence remained present in every room. The maid opened the dining room doors moments later. Warm golden light spilled across polished floors and gleaming silver. The room itself was breathtaking in scale. A crystal chandelier glimmered above an enormous mahogany table long enough to seat 30 guests comfortably. Tonight, only 5 places had been set. The size of the room made the small gathering feel oddly isolated. Sebastian already stood near the fireplace, speaking quietly with Lady Margaret. He turned the moment Evelyn entered. Theo sat stiffly beside the center of the table, pretending not to watch everything at once. Lily swung her feet beneath her chair with complete disregard for aristocratic dignity. Miss Carter, Sebastian said formally, I trust your rooms are comfortable. Very much so, Your Grace. His gaze lingered on her only briefly before shifting toward the empty chair beside Lily. Please. Evelyn crossed the room carefully, aware of every servant stationed silently along the walls. The atmosphere inside the dining room felt even more restrained than the rest of the manor, as though conversation itself required permission here. Lily brightened instantly when Evelyn sat beside her. Theo attempted to appear indifferent and failed entirely. Dinner began with soup served in delicate porcelain bowls edged with gold. For several minutes, only the sounds of silverware and distant rain against the windows filled the room. Evelyn quickly realized something unsettling. No one here knew how to behave naturally anymore. Lady Margaret maintained elegant conversation out of habit. Theo spoke only when addressed directly. Lily occasionally forgot the rules and immediately corrected herself afterward. Sebastian remained composed and attentive, yet emotionally distant enough to make the enormous room feel colder whenever he fell silent. It was not cruelty. That made it worse somehow. Coldness born from grief always carried sadness beneath it. Theo informed me you enjoy history, Sebastian said eventually, his attention turning toward Evelyn across the candlelit table. Evelyn nearly looked behind herself in surprise. History? Theo straightened slightly. Miss Carter knew who defeated Napoleon at Austerlitz. Sebastian glanced toward his son with mild interest. That is apparently now your measure of trustworthy character? Theo hesitated. It is a reasonable beginning. Lily sighed dramatically. Theo only likes people who read boring books. History is not boring. It absolutely is. You cried during the story about the dragon last week. That dragon died. Theo looked deeply offended by her logic. To Evelyn's surprise, Sebastian lowered his wineglass slowly, watching the exchange with faint disbelief. You are both unusually talkative tonight, he observed. Theo immediately became self-conscious. Lily ignored the comment entirely. Miss Carter promised to teach me card tricks. Evelyn blinked. I do not believe I promised. You implied. Sebastian's gaze shifted toward Evelyn again. Calm. Measuring. There was no hostility in it. Only quiet confusion. As though he still could not understand how this woman had somehow entered his carefully ordered household and disrupted its silence in less than 2 days. I confess, he said after a moment. This is not the reception I expected. Evelyn folded her napkin carefully in her lap. Should I be concerned? A faint shadow of amusement touched his expression. Possibly. Lady Margaret hid another smile behind her glass. The children generally react to visitors as though defending the castle from invasion. That is not true, Lily protested. Theo muttered. It is mostly true. Sebastian rested one hand lightly against the table while studying his son. You disliked the last governess within 11 minutes. Theo looked mildly defensive. She called me Theodore repeatedly after I asked her not to. You are Theodore. Only to adults. And to judges, Lily added helpfully. What judges? Sebastian asked slowly. The imaginary ones, Lily explained. Silence followed that statement. Evelyn pressed her lips together to hide laughter. Theo looked horrified. Lady Margaret appeared moments away from surrendering entirely to amusement. Then, unexpectedly, Sebastian laughed. The sound was low and brief, barely more than a quiet breath of genuine amusement. Yet every servant in the room froze instantly. Even Theo stared at his father in open shock. The laughter vanished almost immediately from Sebastian's expression, as though he had forgotten how to hold it there. But the damage was done. The atmosphere at the table changed completely. Softer now. Human. Evelyn saw it most clearly in Theo's face. The boy looked at his father with cautious hope, the kind children carried only after long disappointment. It broke her heart a little. Dinner continued more naturally afterward. Lily informed Evelyn that she intended to own 6 horses someday despite being mildly afraid of all large animals. Theo described the observatory tower, hidden in the western wing of the manor, with growing enthusiasm before abruptly realizing he was speaking too much. Each time the children laughed, Sebastian seemed quietly startled by the sound. Not uncomfortable, simply unfamiliar with it now. Halfway through the main course, Lily leaned closer toward Evelyn and whispered much too loudly, "Father used to laugh more." The entire table fell silent instantly. Theo looked ready to collapse into the floor. "Lily," he hissed. Sebastian did not move. Candlelight flickered softly across his face, sharpening the exhaustion beneath his composed expression. For one painful second, grief entered the room so visibly that even the servants seemed to lower their eyes in respect. Lily realized her mistake almost immediately. "I am sorry," she whispered. Sebastian looked at his daughter quietly. Then something softened in his gaze. "You have nothing to apologize for." His voice remained calm, though quieter than before. Lily relaxed slightly. Theo still looked deeply alarmed. Evelyn could feel the sadness pressing against the room now. Heavy, familiar, like an old wound hidden beneath expensive fabric and perfect manners. Sebastian reached for his wineglass but paused midway. "The manor has been too quiet these past years," he admitted finally. The honesty in the statement surprised everyone, perhaps even himself. Theo stared downward at his untouched vegetables. Lily leaned unconsciously against Evelyn's arm again. Sebastian noticed. Of course he noticed. His gaze lingered there briefly before lifting toward Evelyn once more. "You appear unusually comfortable with children," he said. The question beneath the statement was obvious. "Why?" Evelyn answered carefully. "My younger brother is 11 years younger than I am. After our mother passed, I helped raise him." Sebastian regarded her steadily across the candlelight. "And did he also introduce snakes to governesses?" Theo groaned softly. Lily looked delighted all over again. Evelyn smiled despite herself. "Only once." Another flicker of amusement touched Sebastian's eyes. Smaller this time, sadder too, yet undeniably real. The servants exchanged nearly imperceptible glances along the walls. Blackwood Manor had likely not heard this much conversation at dinner in years. When dessert arrived, Lily began growing visibly sleepy. She fought it bravely for almost 7 minutes before yawning directly into her spoon. Theo pretended not to notice while quietly pushing the sugar pastries closer toward his sister's plate. Sebastian observed the gesture silently. Evelyn noticed him noticing. The Duke loved his children deeply. That much was becoming impossible to miss. He simply seemed terrified of failing them somehow. "Bedtime," Sebastian said gently at last. Lily immediately looked devastated. "But I am not tired." She yawned again before finishing the sentence. Theo rose with the solemn dignity of a tiny, exhausted lawyer. Lily climbed reluctantly from her chair, then paused beside Evelyn. "Will you still be here tomorrow morning?" The question carried such careful hope that Evelyn's chest tightened painfully. "Yes," she answered softly. Lily smiled with visible relief. Then, without warning, the little girl bent forward and hugged her quickly around the shoulders. The entire room went still again. Theo froze beside his chair. One maid nearly dropped a serving tray outright. Sebastian stared openly this time. Shock stripped every trace of aristocratic composure from his face for one brief, unguarded second. Lily either did not notice or did not care. She simply pulled away afterward and announced proudly, "Good night." Then she marched toward the door before anyone could recover. Theo lingered behind awkwardly. "Good night, Miss Carter." "Good night, Theo." He hesitated another second before adding quietly, "Father is less sad tonight." Then the boy disappeared after his sister. Silence settled across the dining room once more after the children left. Yet now the silence felt different. Not empty. Fragile, perhaps. Like something waking slowly after a very long winter. Evelyn lowered her gaze toward the untouched dessert before her, suddenly uncertain where to look. Across the table, Sebastian remained perfectly still, watching her. Candlelight reflected softly in his gray eyes. "Miss Carter," he said at last, his voice quieter than before, "I do not believe my daughter has embraced anyone outside this family since her mother died." Evelyn's breath caught slightly. The weight of the confession settled heavily between them. Sebastian looked away first, toward the dark windows, toward the rain beyond the glass. "I confess," he said slowly, "I no longer know what to make of you." The storm returned just after midnight. Wind rattled the tall windows hard enough to wake Evelyn from sleep. For several disoriented seconds, she lay still beneath heavy blankets listening to rain lash against the manor walls. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the eastern hills. The sound echoed faintly through the enormous estate like distant cannon fire. Evelyn sat up slowly. Cold blue light flickered across her bedroom each time lightning split the sky outside. The fire in her hearth had burned low, leaving the room wrapped in silver shadows and restless silence. She reached instinctively for the pocket watch resting on her bedside table. Nearly 1 in the morning. Another sharp burst of thunder shook the windows. Then came a second sound. Footsteps. Small, hurried footsteps racing through the corridor beyond her room. Evelyn frowned slightly. A child's footsteps. She crossed quickly toward the door and opened it just as another flash of lightning illuminated the hallway. Lily stood several feet away, clutching a blanket around herself. Her golden curls were tangled from sleep. Tears shimmered visibly in her wide blue eyes. The little girl froze the moment she saw Evelyn. "I am sorry," she whispered immediately. "I did not mean to wake anyone." Another thunderclap cracked overhead. Lily flinched hard enough to nearly lose her blanket. Evelyn's heart tightened instantly. "Lily," she said gently, stepping into the corridor. "What happened?" The child looked embarrassed by her own fear. "I do not like storms." Before Evelyn could answer, another bedroom door opened farther down the corridor. Theo appeared carrying a candle lantern. His dark hair looked thoroughly disheveled from sleep. "I told you not to run through the hallway," he muttered tiredly. Then he noticed Evelyn standing there. "Oh!" Lily lowered her gaze guiltily. "I was trying not to wake anyone." Theo sighed the exhausted sigh of an elderly man trapped inside a child's body. "Father is still in his study," he informed Evelyn quietly. "Lily usually sits there during storms." "Usually?" Evelyn repeated softly. Theo shifted awkwardly. "Mother used to sing during thunderstorms." The corridor fell silent except for the rain. Lily clutched her blanket tighter around herself. Evelyn felt something painful settle inside her chest. Another memory haunting this house. Another absence nobody had survived properly. "Would you like some tea?" Evelyn asked gently. Theo looked surprised by the question. Lily blinked. "At 1 in the morning? I believe storms make exceptions for proper schedules." A tiny smile tugged at Lily's mouth despite her fear. Theo still looked uncertain. "Cook will be furious if we wake the kitchen staff. Then we shall avoid waking them." Evelyn glanced toward the candle lantern in his hands. "Do either of you know where the kitchen is?" 20 minutes later, all three of them stood inside a warm downstairs kitchen lit by candlelight and rain-filtered moonlight from narrow windows above the sinks. The enormous room smelled faintly of bread and cinnamon. Copper pots gleamed softly along the walls. Theo had taken personal responsibility for lighting extra candles with grave determination. Lily sat wrapped in blankets atop one of the wooden counters while Evelyn attempted to prepare tea without alarming the sleeping staff. "You are doing that incorrectly," Theo informed her after watching silently for nearly 30 seconds. Evelyn glanced toward the kettle. "I suspected as much." Theo climbed onto a nearby chair with visible reluctance. "You must warm the teapot first." "Naturally. Otherwise the tea cools too quickly." "An unforgivable tragedy." Lily giggled softly into her blanket. Theo pretended not to hear her. Another burst of thunder rolled outside. Lily visibly stiffened again. Without thinking, Evelyn crossed toward the little girl and tucked the blanket more securely around her shoulders. "Would you like a story while we wait for the tea?" Lily nodded immediately. Theo tried to appear uninterested. Failed again. Evelyn leaned lightly against the counter beside them. "Very well. Once upon a time, there was a lighthouse keeper who was terrified of storms." Theo frowned slightly. "That seems inconvenient." "Extremely inconvenient," Evelyn agreed, "particularly because he lived on a cliff directly beside the ocean." Lily settled deeper into her blanket while Theo quietly abandoned all pretense of disinterest. Evelyn continued softly while rain battered the windows around them. She told them about a lonely lighthouse perched above dark waves. About a keeper who feared thunder so deeply, he nearly abandoned the coast altogether. Then one terrible winter storm. A lost ship appeared through the fog carrying frightened passengers, searching desperately for shore. "Did he save them?" Lily whispered. Evelyn smiled gently. "He climbed to the top of the lighthouse in the middle of the storm and kept the light burning all night long." Theo crossed his arms thoughtfully. "Even though he was afraid?" "Especially because he was afraid." The kitchen fell quiet except for the kettle beginning to whistle softly. Theo looked down at the lantern flame in his hands. "Father says bravery means doing frightening things correctly." Evelyn glanced at him carefully. "Your father sounds wise." Theo looked older suddenly. Sadder too. "He was different before Mother died." The words came quietly, matter of fact. Yet the pain beneath them filled the warm kitchen more completely than the storm outside. Lily lowered her eyes. Evelyn chose her response carefully. "I think grief changes people in ways they do not expect." Theo studied her face with unusual seriousness. "You understand that?" Evelyn hesitated only briefly. "My mother died when I was 14. Silence settled over the children. Lily slid quietly from the counter and crossed toward Evelyn without hesitation. She wrapped small arms around Evelyn's waist with sleepy sincerity. "I am sorry," she whispered. Emotion caught unexpectedly in Evelyn's throat. She rested one gentle hand against the little girl's curls. "Thank you." Theo looked away quickly, pretending intense concentration on the teapot. Another crash of thunder shook the manor. Lily flinched again, though less severely this time. Evelyn brushed soft strands of hair back from the child's forehead. "Do you know what my mother used to tell me during storms?" Lily shook her head. "She said thunder only sounds frightening because the sky does not know how else to express itself." Lily considered this deeply. "That is sad." "A little. I think the sky should try talking instead." Evelyn laughed softly beneath her breath. "An excellent suggestion. It would solve many problems," Theo agreed solemnly. The kitchen door opened suddenly behind them. All three children froze instantly. Sebastian stood in the doorway still wearing dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled carelessly toward his elbows. Candlelight flickered across sharp cheekbones and tired gray eyes. For one suspended second, nobody spoke. Sebastian's gaze moved slowly across the scene before him. Theo standing beside the stove. Lily wrapped around Evelyn's waist. Candles glowing warmly through the kitchen. Steam rising from fresh tea. Something unreadable crossed his expression. Astonishment, perhaps. "It is 1:30 in the morning," he said finally. Theo immediately straightened. "Lily dislikes storms." "I am aware." Lily looked guilty now. "I could not sleep." Sebastian's attention shifted toward Evelyn. "And Miss Carter decided the solution involved invading my kitchen?" His tone remained calm enough that Evelyn could not determine whether he approved or disapproved. "In fairness," she answered carefully, "the tea was Theo's idea." Theo looked betrayed. "Miss Carter." To Evelyn's complete shock, Sebastian laughed quietly again. The sound appeared to surprise him almost as much as everyone else. He crossed slowly into the kitchen while rain hammered the windows behind him. "I should like to point out," he said dryly, "that I employ an entire household staff specifically to prevent my children from making tea unattended after midnight." Theo muttered, "We were supervising her." Sebastian's eyes closed briefly as though fighting amusement. Then his gaze landed on Lily still clinging comfortably to Evelyn. Something in his expression softened instantly, deeply, painfully. Evelyn realized with sudden certainty that he had not seen his daughter this relaxed in a very long time. "Did the storm wake everyone?" he asked quietly. Theo shook his head. "Only us." Sebastian nodded once. Then his attention shifted toward the half-prepared tea service and the warm glow filling the kitchen around them. "You told them stories," he observed. Evelyn felt strangely self-conscious beneath his steady gaze. "Only to distract from the thunder." "It worked," Lily announced proudly. Sebastian looked down at his daughter. "I can see that." Silence settled softly over the kitchen after that. Not cold this time, merely tired. Human. Theo finally cleared his throat awkwardly. "The lighthouse keeper survived," he informed his father. "Apparently bravery involves being terrified correctly." Sebastian's gaze lifted slowly toward Evelyn again. Something unreadable passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "An admirable philosophy," he said quietly. Another crack of thunder echoed beyond the windows, yet Lily barely reacted this time. She simply leaned sleepily against Evelyn's side while fighting another yawn. Sebastian noticed every detail of it. Of course he did. He seemed to notice everything concerning his children. Yet now there was something else in his expression too. Not suspicion anymore. Something far more dangerous. Hope. The morning after the storm, Blackwood Manor felt different. Not transformed entirely. The silence still lingered in the hallways. Portraits still watched from shadowed walls with solemn aristocratic judgment. Servants still moved with careful restraint through polished corridors scented faintly with beeswax and cedar smoke. Yet beneath the familiar stillness, something softer had begun to emerge. Evelyn noticed it first during breakfast. Lily arrived carrying a sketchbook and announced immediately, "Miss Carter sits beside me now." Theo pretended to find the declaration deeply unreasonable while quietly pulling out Evelyn's chair before she reached the table. Sebastian observed both actions over the rim of his coffee cup without comment. But Evelyn noticed the way his fingers paused briefly against the porcelain. The way his eyes lingered on his children with cautious disbelief. Like a man standing too close to happiness after convincing himself he no longer deserved it. By afternoon, the manor staff had begun openly watching Evelyn whenever she entered a room with the children. Not hostile exactly, confused. One maid nearly crossed herself after witnessing Theo voluntarily sharing dessert with another human being. Another servant looked moments away from fainting when Lily insisted on reading beside Evelyn in the library rather than running wild through the west corridor as usual. "They are behaving as though you performed sorcery," Lady Margaret remarked dryly while arranging flowers in the morning room. Evelyn smiled faintly from her place beside the window. "I merely listened to them. Most adults speak at children." Lady Margaret trimmed a pale rose stem carefully. "Very few listen." Outside, sunlight spilled warmly across the eastern gardens. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, Evelyn could hear laughter drifting through the open terrace doors. Theo and Lily were somewhere near the fountain arguing over the construction of a toy sailboat. Theo insisted precision mattered. Lily insisted color mattered more. Their voices carried brightly across the grounds. Lady Margaret went still beside the flowers. "Good heavens," she murmured quietly. "I had forgotten this house could sound alive." The statement settled heavily between them. Evelyn lowered her gaze toward her untouched embroidery. "They miss their mother very much. As does Sebastian." Lady Margaret sighed softly. Though my nephew would rather wrestle Parliament than discuss grief honestly. Evelyn thought back to the kitchen the night before. The exhaustion in Sebastian's face beneath the candlelight. The way he had watched Lily leaning against Evelyn with almost painful longing. He loves them deeply, Evelyn said. Yes, Lady Margaret answered immediately. Enough to fear failing them every moment of every day. Before Evelyn could respond, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. Seconds later, Theo appeared breathless in the doorway. Miss Carter. Evelyn straightened instantly. What happened? Theo looked both furious and embarrassed. The stable boys said something unpleasant. Lady Margaret's expression sharpened. About whom? Theo hesitated. About Miss Carter. Silence fell immediately. Theo's jaw tightened with unmistakable anger far older than a child should carry. They said she only came here because father is wealthy. Evelyn felt heat rise faintly beneath her skin. There it was. The whisper she had expected from the beginning. Not cruel enough to create scandal. Only sharp enough to wound quietly. Lady Margaret looked livid. Which stable boys? Thomas and Eric. Theo crossed his arms tightly. I told them they were idiots. Language, Lady Margaret corrected automatically. Sorry. Theo barely sounded sorry at all. Evelyn set aside her embroidery gently. Theo. The boy looked toward her immediately. You do not need to defend me. Yes, I do. The response came without hesitation. Fierce. Certain. Startled both women into silence. Theo seemed surprised by his own intensity afterward. His gaze dropped briefly toward the carpet. People said similar things about Mother, he admitted quietly. Before father married her. Evelyn's heart tightened painfully. Theo. They said she was too kind for society. Too soft. They said father would become bored of her. His voice remained carefully steady, though emotion pressed beneath every word. They were wrong. Lady Margaret looked away toward the garden windows. Theo inhaled slowly before continuing. People always say ugly things when they do not understand something. Evelyn crossed the room before she fully thought through the movement. She crouched carefully in front of him until they stood nearly eye level. Your mother sounds remarkable. Theo blinked quickly and looked down. She was. And you defending others because of her would probably make her very proud. For one fragile second, Theo looked dangerously close to tears. The boy fought the emotion instantly with rigid determination. Evelyn recognized the habit immediately. Children in grieving households learned far too early how to hide pain so adults would worry less. I did not cry, Theo announced stiffly. Evelyn nodded solemnly. Of course not. I almost did. A terrifying near disaster. A startled laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Lady Margaret quietly left the room without interrupting the moment. Theo scrubbed quickly at his eyes with visible irritation. I dislike those boys. That is understandable. Father will dismiss them if he learns they upset you. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. And would that truly solve anything? Theo hesitated. No. People often fear what changes familiar patterns. She smiled gently. I imagine your household has remained the same for a very long time. Theo looked toward the garden thoughtfully. Everything stopped after Mother died. The simplicity of the statement nearly broke her heart. And now, Theo glanced back toward her. Somewhere outside, Lily shouted triumphantly about the sailboat surviving. The sound drifted warmly through the open windows. Theo listened to it quietly before answering. Now things feel strange. Evelyn smiled softly. Strange can become good eventually. Before Theo could respond, another voice echoed from the hallway behind them. There you are. Sebastian entered the morning room carrying several folded documents beneath one arm. He looked composed as always in a dark navy coat tailored with ruthless perfection. Yet exhaustion still lingered faintly beneath his eyes. I have apparently spent 20 minutes searching the estate for my son, he said dryly. Theo straightened immediately. I was occupied. Sebastian's gaze shifted briefly toward Evelyn kneeling beside the boy. Something unreadable flickered across his expression before he looked back toward Theo. Your sister has informed the entire gardening staff that she intends to become a pirate captain. Theo sighed deeply. I warned her about the boat. Did you? Repeatedly. Sebastian almost smiled. Then he noticed Theo's reddened eyes. The amusement disappeared instantly. What happened? Theo opened his mouth, closed it again. Evelyn rose slowly before answering. A misunderstanding with some of the stable boys. Sebastian's expression sharpened with immediate quiet danger. What misunderstanding? Theo spoke before Evelyn could soften the truth. They implied Miss Carter only came here for your money. The room went still. Sebastian did not react immediately. That somehow felt worse. His face remained perfectly calm while silence stretched heavily between them. I see, he said at last. Theo crossed his arms again. I already informed them they were idiots. Language, Sebastian corrected automatically. Sorry. Unlike before, Theo actually sounded distracted now. Sebastian looked toward Evelyn. And how did Miss Carter respond to this insult? By not dismissing half your staff, Evelyn answered lightly. To her surprise, something almost warm entered his eyes. Remarkably restrained of you. Theo looked deeply hopeful. You are still dismissing Thomas though, correct? Sebastian sighed softly beneath his breath. No, Theo. Pity. Evelyn bit back another smile. Sebastian studied her quietly for a moment after that. You are handling this household far more gracefully than most people would. Your children make it rather easy. His gaze lingered on her face a second too long. Do they? The question carried layers neither of them fully acknowledged. Before the silence could deepen further, Lily burst into the room carrying the toy sailboat triumphantly above her head. Theo, she announced breathlessly. The boat survived. Then she noticed Sebastian and brightened immediately. Father, Miss Carter says strange things can become good eventually. Sebastian's eyes shifted slowly toward Evelyn again. Something vulnerable flickered across his face so quickly she almost missed it. Hope again. Careful. Dangerous. Did she? He asked quietly. Lily nodded enthusiastically. And Theo defended her from horrible people. Theo looked mortified. Lily. It was very noble. Sebastian stared at his son for one long silent moment. Then he crossed the room and rested one hand briefly against Theo's shoulder. Pride softened his expression in a way that transformed him entirely. Your mother would be proud of you, he said quietly. Theo looked stunned. The boy blinked rapidly before lowering his gaze toward the floor. Thank you, father. Evelyn turned away slightly to give him privacy. Yet her own throat tightened unexpectedly. The moment felt unbearably fragile. A grieving father trying desperately to reconnect with his son. A child starving for approval he had missed hearing aloud. And somehow she had wandered directly into the center of it all. Lily climbed beside Evelyn moments later and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. I think Blackwood Manor likes you now. Theo groaned softly. Sebastian looked toward Evelyn across the sunlight flooding the room. Then, for the first time since she arrived, the Duke of Blackwood smiled at her fully. Not politely, not briefly, truly smiled, and the entire room seemed warmer because of it. 3 days later, the first cracks in Blackwood Manor's fragile peace arrived in a carriage trimmed with silver. Evelyn saw it through the library window shortly after noon. For black horses slowed across the front drive while servants hurried instinctively toward the entrance hall. Even from a distance, the arrival carried the unmistakable energy of someone accustomed to admiration. Theo noticed the carriage at the same moment. The boy's entire posture stiffened beside the chessboard between them. Oh no, he muttered. Evelyn looked up from her book. That does not sound encouraging. Theo leaned back heavily in his chair. It is Lady Vivian. The name meant little to Evelyn at first. Then she noticed the expression on his face. Not fear. Exhaustion. Lily wandered into the library seconds later carrying an armful of ribbons collected from somewhere upstairs. The moment she saw the carriage through the window, she stopped walking entirely. Why is she here? Theo sighed dramatically. Because God enjoys testing us. Evelyn nearly laughed before remembering she was supposed to be the responsible adult in the room. Who exactly is Lady Vivian? Lily made a face powerful enough to qualify as diplomacy failure. She smells expensive. Theo nodded grimly. And she calls me Theodore even after I ask her not to. That explained a surprising amount. Before Evelyn could ask another question, the library doors opened. A maid stepped inside looking slightly breathless. Miss Carter. His Grace requests your presence in the drawing room. Theo looked suddenly sympathetic. Good luck. How reassuring, Evelyn murmured. The drawing room doors stood partially open when Evelyn arrived downstairs. She heard the woman's laughter before entering. Rich, elegant, carefully practiced. Lady Vivian Ashcombe stood near the fireplace dressed in deep burgundy silk that clung perfectly to her tall, graceful figure. Dark curls framed a face beautiful enough to make painters wealthy. Every detail about her suggested refinement, confidence, and social perfection. She looked exactly like the sort of woman London society would expect beside a duke. Sebastian stood across from her with polite composure. Lady Margaret remained seated nearby, observing everything with visible caution. The moment Evelyn entered the room, Lady Vivian turned smoothly toward her. Sharp green eyes traveled over Evelyn in one measured glance. Assessing. Calculating. Ah, she said warmly. Miss Carter at last. Evelyn curtsied politely. Lady Vivian. The other woman smiled with perfect social grace. Sebastian neglected to mention his future duchess was so lovely. The compliment somehow felt colder than criticism. Sebastian's expression remained unreadable. Miss Carter has been settling into the household. Clearly. Lady Vivian's gaze drifted briefly toward the hallway behind Evelyn, where faint children's voices echoed from upstairs. I heard laughter when I arrived. I nearly assumed I had entered the wrong manor. The room fell subtly quiet. Lady Margaret reached for her teacup with suspiciously precise movements. Evelyn sensed immediately that this woman knew exactly where every conversational knife belonged. The children seem happier recently, Evelyn answered carefully. Lady Vivian's smile sharpened slightly. How remarkable! She crossed the room with elegant ease until she stood directly before Evelyn. You must tell me your secret someday. Theo usually dislikes everyone. Vivian, Sebastian said quietly. What? She glanced back at him with innocent surprise. It was a compliment. Sebastian did not look convinced. Lady Vivian turned smoothly toward Evelyn again. You must forgive me. I have known these children since Lily was born. Her fingers brushed lightly against the edge of a nearby chair. In many ways, Blackwood Manor once felt like my second home. The statement settled heavily in the room. Evelyn understood immediately. Of course, society had expected this woman to become the next Duchess of Blackwood after Isabella's death. Beautiful, aristocratic, familiar with the family. The obvious choice. Lady Vivian smiled softly, as though reading the realization directly from Evelyn's face. Sebastian and I have known each other since childhood. Vivian, Sebastian repeated, more firmly this time. She sighed lightly. Must you always sound so alarmed when I speak? Only when necessary. To Evelyn's astonishment, Lady Vivian laughed genuinely at that. There you are, she said softly. I was beginning to think Parliament had replaced you with a colder duplicate. Something flickered briefly across Sebastian's face. Weariness, perhaps. Familiar history, certainly. Before anyone could continue, Lily appeared in the doorway carrying several ribbons tangled hopelessly around one wrist. Miss Carter, she announced immediately. Theo says I tied myself into a knot. Then she noticed Lady Vivian. The child's excitement vanished almost instantly. Oh! Lady Vivian opened her arms gracefully. Lily, darling. Lily approached slowly enough that even Evelyn noticed the reluctance. Lady Vivian kissed the child's forehead delicately. You have grown taller since Christmas. That was only 3 months ago, Lily answered. Children grow quickly. Lady Vivian's gaze shifted toward the ribbons. Good heavens! What happened to those? I attempted art, Lily said seriously. Theo appeared behind his sister moments later. Unlike Lily, he made absolutely no attempt to hide his disappointment. Lady Vivian. Theodore. Theo visibly suffered through the name. Evelyn almost pitied him. Almost. You look taller as well, Lady Vivian continued smoothly. I am. How fascinating. Theo looked toward Sebastian hopefully. May we leave now? Theo, Sebastian warned quietly. What? I greeted her. Lady Vivian laughed lightly again, though something colder flickered beneath the sound this time. He has become remarkably direct lately. Theo values honesty, Evelyn said before thinking better of it. Silence followed. Lady Vivian turned toward her slowly. Does he? Very much, Theo answered immediately. Sebastian closed his eyes briefly as though enduring a headache. Lady Margaret looked dangerously close to enjoying herself. Lady Vivian recovered her composure beautifully. How refreshing! Yet now her attention rested more carefully on Evelyn. Measuring again. Studying. Theo crossed the room until he stood beside Evelyn's chair with quiet determination. Lily followed seconds later. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. Both children positioned themselves near Evelyn instinctively, like birds returning toward safety. Lady Vivian noticed. Of course she noticed. Her smile remained flawless. Her eyes did not. Well, she said lightly, it appears Blackwood Manor has acquired new loyalties. Sebastian's gaze moved immediately toward the children beside Evelyn. Something unreadable darkened his expression. Children become attached quickly, Lady Vivian continued softly, particularly after loss. The statement carried layers beneath its elegance. A warning disguised as concern. Evelyn felt it instantly. So did Sebastian. Vivian, he said quietly. This time there was unmistakable caution in his voice. Lady Vivian sighed again and moved gracefully toward the tea service. Must everyone behave as though I intend scandal? I merely worry for the children. Theo muttered under his breath. You worry for everything. Theodore. Sorry. He did not sound remotely sorry. Lady Vivian poured tea with perfect composure. I only mean that sudden changes can confuse young hearts. Her eyes lifted toward Evelyn over the porcelain cup. Especially when affection arrives very quickly. There it was at last. Polite suspicion wrapped in silk and smiles. Evelyn kept her posture calm despite the sting beneath the words. Children are often kinder than adults, she answered gently. Lady Vivian's smile cooled another degree. Sebastian stepped forward before the silence could sharpen further. Miss Carter has been nothing except considerate toward my family. The room stilled instantly. Lady Vivian looked genuinely surprised. Not by the statement itself. By the fact Sebastian had spoken it aloud. Defended Evelyn publicly, however mildly. Theo noticed too. Evelyn saw the boy's eyes widen slightly beside her. Lady Margaret calmly reached for another pastry like a woman witnessing history unfold exactly as predicted. Lady Vivian recovered elegantly after only a second. Of course, she said softly. I meant no criticism. But now something had changed beneath the surface politeness. Evelyn could feel it clearly. Lady Vivian no longer viewed her as temporary. She viewed her as competition. The realization settled heavily in Evelyn's chest. Because for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, she understood something dangerous. This household was no longer simply beginning to tolerate her. It was beginning to choose her. And not everyone intended to allow that peacefully. That evening, Blackwood Manor felt colder again. Not openly hostile. The laughter still lingered faintly in certain corridors. Lily still searched for Evelyn every morning with unquestioning affection. Theo still hovered nearby whenever she entered a room as though ensuring she had not mysteriously vanished overnight. Yet Lady Vivian's arrival had disturbed something delicate inside the household. Evelyn sensed it most clearly during dinner. Sebastian remained courteous as always, though quieter than usual. Lady Vivian carried the conversation effortlessly with polished stories about London society, Parliament gossip, and upcoming spring gatherings. Every servant in the room seemed faintly relieved by her presence. She belonged here in the way expensive portraits belonged inside gold frames. Familiar, appropriate, predictable. Evelyn, meanwhile, suddenly felt painfully aware of every small imperfection. The slightly older cut of her dark blue gown. The gloves repaired too carefully at the fingertips. The fact she still occasionally hesitated before using the correct silverware at formal dinners because her family had spent too many years pretending to remain wealthier than they truly were. Lady Vivian noticed everything. "You spent most of your life in Bath, did you not?" she asked lightly while the second course was served. "Yes. How peaceful that must have been." Her smile remained elegant. "I confess I cannot imagine surviving away from society for very long." Theo muttered quietly into his water glass. "I can." Sebastian hid suspiciously familiar amusement behind his wine. Lady Vivian ignored the interruption gracefully. "London can be exhausting, of course, though eventually one learns the rules well enough to survive." Evelyn understood the implication immediately. Some women belonged naturally within aristocratic society. Others merely visited. "I suspect survival matters more than elegance in most situations," Evelyn answered softly. Lady Vivian's green eyes sharpened slightly. An interesting philosophy for a future duchess. Before Evelyn could respond, Lily announced brightly, "Miss Carter survived Theo's snake story." Theo nearly choked on his drink. "Lily, I am merely contributing." Sebastian pressed 2 fingers briefly against his temple. "I regret asking no questions whatsoever about this snake." Theo looked toward Evelyn hopefully. "You promised discretion. I promised consideration. That is not the same thing." Lady Vivian laughed politely, though now her attention rested almost entirely on Evelyn. Measuring again. Testing. "The children are clearly devoted already," she observed softly. "It has been quite some time since I have seen them this comfortable around anyone new." Theo's posture stiffened immediately beside the table. Lily looked oblivious. Sebastian remained unreadable. "Children often know more about character than adults expect," Evelyn replied carefully. "Perhaps." Lady Vivian lifted her wineglass slightly. "Or perhaps they simply grow attached to kindness quickly when they have been lonely." Silence settled over the table. The statement sounded sympathetic. Yet beneath the softness lingered another meaning entirely. Temporary affection. Temporary comfort. Temporary woman. Sebastian set down his glass with controlled precision. "Vivian." Her gaze shifted toward him innocently. "What?" "Enough." The single word changed the atmosphere instantly. Not loud. Not angry. Worse. Quiet enough that everyone understood he rarely repeated himself. Lady Vivian blinked once before recovering beautifully. "Of course," she said softly. "Forgive me." Yet the damage remained. Evelyn felt it lingering beneath her skin long after dinner ended. Hours later, unable to sleep, she wandered quietly through the east corridor with a book tucked beneath one arm. Rain whispered faintly against distant windows while the manor settled into midnight silence around her. She passed several darkened drawing rooms before noticing a thin line of light beneath one partially opened door. Curious, she slowed instinctively. Music drifted softly through the gap. Piano music. Gentle. Hauntingly beautiful. Evelyn hesitated only a second before recognizing the room. The old music chamber Lady Margaret had mentioned once in passing. The former Duchess's favorite room. The realization should have sent her elsewhere immediately. Instead, something about the music held her there. Sadness lived inside every note. Not dramatic grief. Quiet grief. The kind carried too long in silence. Evelyn stepped carefully closer. Sebastian sat alone at the piano with his back partially turned toward the doorway. Candlelight flickered across the dark room around him. His jacket had been discarded over a nearby chair. One hand rested against the piano keys while the other remained motionless in his lap between phrases. He looked exhausted. More than exhausted. Like a man trying desperately to remember who he had once been before sorrow hollowed everything out. Evelyn should have left. She knew that immediately. Yet before she could retreat quietly, the floorboard beneath her shifted faintly. Sebastian stopped playing at once. Silence swallowed the room. Then he spoke without turning around. "You may come in, Miss Carter. Hiding has already failed." Heat rose instantly to Evelyn's cheeks. She stepped slowly into the room instead. "I apologize. I did not mean to intrude." Sebastian looked over one shoulder toward her. Candlelight softened the sharp lines of his face. "You were not intruding." The music chamber was beautiful despite the melancholy lingering within it. Shelves of sheet music lined the walls beside towering windows draped in silver curtains. Fresh white roses stood near the piano in a crystal vase. Evelyn noticed them immediately. Someone still replaced the flowers regularly. Isabella's room remained alive inside this house. "You play beautifully," Evelyn said quietly. Sebastian looked back toward the piano keys instead of answering immediately. "My wife taught me." There it was again. Not avoidance. Not denial. Grief spoken aloud with calm acceptance. Evelyn crossed slowly toward the nearest window. Rain shimmered faintly against the glass beyond her reflection. "Lady Vivian mentioned she knew your family well." Sebastian's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Vivian and Isabella were close friends." "I see. Society expected I would eventually marry Vivian after Isabella died." His voice remained calm, detached almost. "Society tends to enjoy predictable stories." Evelyn looked down briefly at her hands. "And did you?" The question escaped before she fully considered it. Silence followed. Sebastian did not appear offended, merely thoughtful. "No," he answered at last. "Vivian is intelligent, accomplished, and entirely suited to aristocratic life." His gaze lifted slowly toward Evelyn across the candlelit room. "But she was never Isabella." Something tightened unexpectedly in Evelyn's chest. Not jealousy, sadness perhaps, because she suddenly understood the impossible shadow living over Blackwood Manor. No woman here would simply become Duchess. She would inherit a ghost. Sebastian rested one hand lightly against the piano. When Isabella died, everyone expected time to solve the problem eventually. His mouth curved faintly without humor, as though grief were an inconvenience rather than devastation. Evelyn remained very still. His voice had changed, softer now, more honest than she had ever heard it. "Theo stopped speaking for nearly 3 months afterward," Sebastian continued quietly. "Lily cried whenever she saw unfamiliar women enter the house." He looked downward briefly. "And I buried myself in work because it felt easier than admitting I no longer understood how to keep any of us whole." The confession filled the room with aching vulnerability. Evelyn could suddenly picture it too clearly. A grieving father wandering enormous silent hallways, while 2 children waited desperately for someone to tell them life would still continue. "You loved her very much," Evelyn whispered. Sebastian's eyes closed briefly. "More than I deserved." The answer carried enough pain to silence the room afterward. Rain continued softly outside while candlelight flickered across the piano keys between them. Finally Sebastian spoke again. "You should understand something, Miss Carter." Evelyn lifted her gaze toward him. "Everything changed after Isabella's death." His voice remained steady though exhaustion shadowed every word. "This house changed. The children changed. I changed." He looked directly at her then with quiet intensity that stole breath from her lungs unexpectedly. "Which is precisely why what is happening now frightens me." Evelyn's heartbeat stumbled once against her ribs. "What is happening now?" Sebastian studied her for a long silent moment before answering. "They are beginning to need you." The honesty in the statement settled heavily between them. Evelyn felt it everywhere. In the silence of the manor. In Lily's sleepy hugs. In Theo's careful loyalty. In the way Sebastian himself watched her whenever she laughed with his children as though terrified to trust the sight. "Children deserve stability," Evelyn said softly. "Not temporary comfort." "Exactly." Yet his gaze never left her face when he said it. Something dangerous moved quietly beneath the words. Fear perhaps. Or longing. Maybe both. Sebastian stood slowly from the piano bench and crossed toward the window beside her. Close enough now that Evelyn caught the faint scent of cedar and rain lingering against his shirt sleeves. "I cannot survive watching them lose another mother," he said quietly. The word mother settled between them like fragile glass. Neither moved, neither breathed properly. Somewhere below them, thunder rolled faintly across distant hills again. Yet inside the music chamber, the silence felt far louder. Sebastian looked toward the rain-dark windows rather than at her now. "And I no longer know whether your presence here is saving this family," he admitted softly, "or placing all of us in danger of hoping again." The London ball took place 4 nights later beneath enough candlelight to rival daylight itself. Hundreds of crystal chandeliers glimmered above the grand ballroom of Ashcombe House, while music drifted elegantly through crowded marble corridors. Silk gowns shimmered like moving rivers of color beneath gold-trimmed ceilings painted with angels and clouds. Everywhere Evelyn looked, aristocratic society unfolded with effortless precision. Laughter behind jeweled fans, perfect curtsies, carefully calculated smiles. It was beautiful in the way expensive things often were. Distant too. Sebastian offered his arm as they entered the ballroom together. The moment they crossed the threshold, conversation shifted subtly around them. Not silence exactly. Worse, tension. Evelyn felt it instantly. Every glance, every whisper hidden behind politeness. The future Duke and Duchess of Blackwood had finally appeared in public together. "Breathe," Sebastian murmured quietly beside her. Evelyn nearly looked up in surprise. "Am I visibly nervous?" "Only to someone paying very close attention." His tone remained calm, though she caught the faintest hint of amusement beneath it. Theo and Lily followed several steps behind them, accompanied by Lady Margaret. Theo already looked deeply unimpressed by society as an institution. Lily, meanwhile, appeared enchanted by everything. "The ceiling is glowing," she whispered dramatically. "That is generally the purpose of chandeliers," Theo informed her. "I think you are glowing too," Lily continued. Theo looked horrified. "Please stop saying things aloud." Sebastian's mouth twitched faintly beside Evelyn. The movement warmed her unexpectedly. Music swelled through the ballroom while nobles approached steadily to greet the Duke. Parliament officials, earls, ladies dripping in diamonds heavy enough to finance small countries. Sebastian navigated each conversation with practiced composure, though Evelyn noticed something quickly. His hand remained lightly against hers whenever introductions became overwhelming. Protective, grounding. Every time society threatened to pull her beneath its scrutiny, he subtly drew her back beside him again. Lady Vivian arrived nearly 30 minutes later wearing silver silk that captured candlelight like liquid moonlight. The reaction around the ballroom proved immediate. Heads turned. Whispers spread. She moved through aristocratic society the way queens moved through kingdoms. Naturally, effortlessly. Yet the moment her eyes landed on Sebastian and Evelyn together near the ballroom terrace, something unreadable flickered across her beautiful face. Not shock. Calculation. "There she is," Lily whispered beside Evelyn with the solemnity of a child identifying approaching weather disaster. Theo sighed heavily. "Please remember we are representing civilization tonight. Civilization is exhausting." "I agree entirely." Before Evelyn could hide her smile, Lady Vivian reached them gracefully through the crowd. "Sebastian," she said warmly, "you survived introductions. A remarkable achievement." Sebastian inclined his head politely. "Barely." Her gaze shifted toward Evelyn immediately afterward. "Miss Carter, you look lovely this evening." The compliment sounded perfect. Too perfect. "Thank you." Lady Vivian's eyes traveled briefly over Evelyn's pale blue gown. Elegant but modest compared to the extravagant silks surrounding them. "Blue suits you beautifully," she continued softly. "It creates such a gentle impression." Theo muttered quietly into his glass. "That sounds dangerous." Sebastian shot his son a warning look. Lady Vivian either did not hear him or chose mercy. Difficult to determine. "Will you dance tonight?" she asked Sebastian smoothly. The question settled into dangerous silence almost immediately. Evelyn felt it ripple subtly through the nearby crowd. Of course, society expected Lady Vivian to claim the Duke's first dance eventually. The history between them practically demanded it. Sebastian's expression remained unreadable. Perhaps later. Lady Vivian smiled lightly. You used to dance every opening waltz before Parliament convinced you joy was suspicious. Parliament has many unfortunate opinions. And yet you continue attending. Dukes rarely escape responsibility successfully. You would if anyone could. The intimacy beneath their exchange was impossible to miss. Shared history. Familiar rhythm. Evelyn suddenly felt painfully out of place standing beside them. Lady Vivian belonged to this world effortlessly. She understood every hidden current beneath aristocratic conversation. Every rule. Every expectation. Evelyn knew how to survive. Vivian knew how to reign. Miss Carter. A sharp female voice interrupted nearby. What a pleasant surprise. Evelyn turned instinctively toward the approaching woman. Lady Penrose. One of the wealthiest hostesses in London society and, if gossip proved accurate, among the cruelest when bored. Her smile gleamed brightly beneath diamond earrings. We heard the Duke intended marriage again, Lady Penrose continued smoothly, though society remained delightfully uncertain regarding whom. Lady Vivian remained perfectly composed beside them. Sebastian's expression cooled several degrees instantly. Lady Penrose, he said quietly. The warning in his tone went entirely ignored. You must forgive curiosity, the woman continued toward Evelyn. Blackwood Manor has been rather closed these past years. The pause before closed carried enough implication to sour the air around them. Miss Carter has adapted remarkably well, Sebastian answered before Evelyn could respond. Lady Penrose smiled with exaggerated sweetness. So quickly, too. The children already seem positively enchanted. Theo visibly bristled beside Lady Margaret. Lily reached instinctively for Evelyn's hand. Children often become attached to novelty, Lady Penrose continued lightly, particularly after emotional hardship. There it was again. Temporary affection, temporary woman. Lady Vivian remained silent this time, watching carefully. Sebastian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Evelyn forced herself to answer calmly despite humiliation beginning to burn beneath her skin. The children have been very kind to me. How fortunate. Lady Penrose sipped champagne delicately. One always hopes affection arrives before practical realities complicate matters. Theo stepped forward before anyone else could speak. What practical realities? The woman blinked. Pardon. Theo looked directly at her with startling calm for a 9-year-old. You keep speaking as though Miss Carter plans to disappear suddenly. It is becoming repetitive. Silence exploded around them. Lady Margaret nearly inhaled champagne incorrectly. Lily stared at her brother with outright admiration. Several nearby nobles abruptly became fascinated by absolutely nothing across the ballroom. Lady Penrose looked scandalized. Theodore. It is Theo. Sebastian closed his eyes briefly. Lady Vivian pressed her lips together suspiciously hard. Evelyn realized with growing horror that she was trying not to laugh. Theo, Sebastian said quietly. Apologize. Theo hesitated. I apologize that Lady Penrose dislikes repetition less than I do. Lady Margaret made a choking sound behind her glass. Sebastian looked moments away from surrendering either to amusement or despair. Evelyn genuinely could not tell which. Lady Penrose flushed visibly. Children should not involve themselves in adult discussions. Adults should not discuss people as though they are furniture, Theo replied immediately. The ballroom fell completely silent around them now. Every nearby conversation had stopped. Sebastian finally stepped forward with dangerous calm settling across his features. That is enough. Theo straightened instantly. Lady Penrose opened her mouth again, likely intending further offense disguised as sophistication. She never received the opportunity, because at that exact moment, Lily slipped her small hand into Evelyn's. Then, with complete innocent sincerity, She leaned gently against Evelyn's side and announced loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear, "I hope Miss Carter never leaves us." Silence crashed through the ballroom harder than thunder. Evelyn felt every eye in the room turn toward them instantly. Theo froze. Lady Margaret lowered her champagne slowly. Even Lady Vivian looked genuinely shaken for one unguarded second. But Sebastian looked at his daughter as though something inside him had just fractured completely open. Lily glanced upward innocently, unaware she had detonated every social expectation in the room. "Lily," Theo whispered urgently. "What? You cannot say emotional things during battles." "Why not?" "Because then people stare. They already stare." Unfortunately, she was correct. Evelyn could barely breathe beneath the weight of attention pressing against them from every direction. Yet through all of it, Sebastian never looked away from his daughter holding Evelyn's hand. Something raw moved across his face now. Fear, hope, love, all tangled together too tightly to separate. Then, slowly, his gaze lifted toward Evelyn. The ballroom seemed to disappear entirely beneath the intensity of that look. Music continued somewhere in the distance. Candles flickered across crystal and gold around them. Yet for one suspended moment, there was only the Duke of Blackwood staring at the woman his children had already chosen long before he understood he was beginning to do the same. The silence following Lily's declaration did not disappear when the music resumed. It followed them through the remainder of the evening like a second shadow. Evelyn felt it in every glance that lingered too long. Every whisper hidden behind jeweled fans. Every subtle pause in conversation when she crossed another glittering ballroom corridor beside the Duke of Blackwood. Society had witnessed something deeply inconvenient. The Blackwood children loved her openly. Worse still, Sebastian had not corrected them. "I believe," Lady Margaret murmured dryly while accepting another glass of champagne from a passing servant, "London may require several days to recover from Theo insulting Lady Penrose publicly." Theo looked entirely unapologetic beside her. "She deserved it. That is unfortunately irrelevant to aristocratic etiquette." "Then etiquette sounds flawed." Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Very flawed." Sebastian looked exhausted by all three of them simultaneously. Yet beneath the exhaustion, Evelyn noticed something else now. The careful emotional distance he had maintained since her arrival was beginning to fracture visibly. Every time someone addressed her dismissively during the remainder of the ball, Sebastian appeared to notice instantly. Every time society treated her as temporary, his expression darkened another degree. The realization unsettled Evelyn more than the gossip itself, because she no longer understood where the boundaries between duty and feeling truly existed for him. "Miss Carter." A deep male voice interrupted her thoughts as another nobleman approached near the ballroom terrace. Lord Barrington bowed politely. "I understand congratulations are in order." "For what exactly?" Theo asked suspiciously before anyone else could answer. Lord Barrington blinked. "Your father's engagement, naturally." Theo considered this briefly. "I dislike when adults ask questions they already answered themselves." Sebastian pressed two fingers briefly against his forehead. "Theo. Sorry." Lord Barrington laughed awkwardly while the surrounding nobles pretended not to hear any of this. The children certainly inherited the Blackwood honesty. "God help us all," Lady Margaret muttered into her champagne. The conversation drifted onward politely after that. Yet the whispers never fully stopped. Evelyn caught fragments constantly as they moved through the ballroom. "Poor girl comes from nothing. The children already adore her. Perhaps the Duke finally grew lonely. Such a convenient attachment. Lady Vivian would have suited him better." Some remarks stung. Others merely exhausted her. By the time the orchestra announced the final waltz before supper, Evelyn felt emotionally worn thin beneath all the smiling scrutiny. "You look overwhelmed." Sebastian's voice appeared quietly beside her near the ballroom windows. Evelyn glanced up. Candlelight softened the sharp severity of his features while distant music drifted around them. "I am managing." A diplomatic answer. "You are a duke." I assumed diplomacy was mandatory. To her surprise, genuine warmth touched his eyes briefly. Only in Parliament. For one rare moment, the noise of the ballroom seemed to recede around them. Theo and Lily had disappeared temporarily toward the refreshment tables with Lady Margaret. Lady Vivian danced somewhere near the center of the floor, surrounded by admirers and silver silk. Sebastian stood close enough now that Evelyn could catch the faint scent of cedar lingering against his coat again. Dangerous familiarity. "You handled tonight remarkably well," he said quietly. Evelyn looked down toward the glittering ballroom floor below them. "Your society does not appear convinced. Society dislikes uncertainty. And I am uncertain?" Sebastian's gaze lingered on her face. "No," the answer came immediately. "Calm. Certain." Evelyn's heartbeat betrayed her at once. Before either could speak further, laughter echoed nearby from a cluster of noblemen standing partially hidden beside one of the marble columns. At first Evelyn paid little attention. Aristocratic men laughed loudly and meaninglessly at nearly everything after enough champagne. Then one sentence drifted clearly through the music. "The children are doing most of the work for her." Another laugh followed. "Smart strategy, honestly. Win the heirs first. The Duke follows naturally afterward." Heat rose instantly beneath Evelyn's skin. She froze where she stood. Sebastian did not. The change in him happened so quickly it almost startled her. One moment he stood beside her calm and composed beneath chandelier light. The next, something dangerously cold settled across his expression. Not explosive anger. Worse, controlled anger. The kind powerful men carried quietly. He turned toward the group of noblemen with terrifying calm. For men stood there holding crystal glasses and expensive opinions. The eldest among them, Lord Ashbury, noticed Sebastian approaching first. His smile vanished immediately. "Blackwood." Sebastian stopped directly before them. Silence spread outward through the nearby ballroom almost instinctively. Aristocrats possessed excellent survival instincts regarding dangerous moods. "You were discussing Miss Carter." It was not a question. Lord Ashbury attempted a weak laugh. "Nothing serious." Sebastian's expression did not change. "Then repeat it." Complete silence. One man actually lowered his champagne glass slowly as though fearing sudden death by social humiliation. Lord Ashbury cleared his throat awkwardly. "You misunderstand." "Do I?" Sebastian's voice remained perfectly even. That somehow made the moment far more frightening. "Because from where I stood, it sounded remarkably like you implied a woman under my protection manipulated my children for social advancement." No one answered. Around them, conversations had begun quietly stopping again. Evelyn felt dozens of eyes turning toward the confrontation from across the ballroom. Lord Ashbury shifted visibly beneath the Duke's gaze. "We meant no insult. And yet you delivered one." Sebastian stepped slightly closer. Not enough to threaten physically. Just enough to establish absolute authority. "Allow me to clarify something for you, Ashbury. My children are not pawns to be won. Miss Carter has shown them more kindness in a matter of weeks than most adults have offered in years." His voice lowered further. "If Theo and Lily care for her deeply, that reflects her character. Not manipulation." The ballroom had fallen nearly silent now. Even the orchestra faltered uncertainly before continuing again more softly. Lord Ashbury looked mortified. "Of course, Blackwood. You will not speak about her that way again." The sentence landed with finality sharp enough to cut glass. Not loud. Not dramatic. Absolute. Evelyn felt her breath catch painfully in her chest. Sebastian had defended her before inside the safety of Blackwood Manor. This was different. Public. Deliberate. Unmistakable. The Duke of Blackwood was standing in the center of London society, openly protecting her reputation. Lord Ashbury bowed stiffly. "My apologies." Sebastian held his gaze another second before stepping back. "See that the apology proves permanent." Then, without another word, he turned and crossed the ballroom directly toward Evelyn again. The crowd parted instinctively around him. Silence followed him like storm clouds. Evelyn stood completely still beside the windows while her heart threatened outright betrayal beneath her ribs. Sebastian stopped before her once more. For several seconds neither spoke. "Your Grace," she said quietly at last. "You did not need to do that." His expression softened slightly then. Exhaustion lingered there. Frustration too. But beneath both emotions lived something far more dangerous now. "Yes," he said softly. "I did." The honesty in the answer left her momentarily speechless. Across the ballroom, Lady Vivian watched them over the rim of her champagne glass. Her beautiful face revealed nothing, yet her eyes remained fixed on Sebastian with growing understanding. She saw it now too. Everyone did. The Duke of Blackwood was no longer simply protecting the woman who cared for his children. He was beginning to care for her himself. "Father." Theo appeared suddenly beside them, looking deeply impressed despite obvious efforts to conceal it. "That was terrifying." Sebastian exhaled softly beneath his breath. "You were listening." Half the ballroom was listening. Lily arrived moments later carrying 3 pastries and absolutely no awareness of social catastrophe. "Why is everyone staring?" Theo accepted 1 pastry automatically. Father threatened a nobleman into self-reflection. "Oh." Lily considered this. "Good." Sebastian actually laughed quietly then. Real laughter. Warm enough this time that several nearby nobles turned outright stunned. Evelyn looked up at him instinctively. Candlelight flickered across his face while Theo argued with Lily about stolen pastries beside them. For one suspended moment, the ballroom no longer felt hostile. Society no longer felt terrifying. There was only this strange, fragile feeling growing between them all. Something dangerously close to belonging. Then Sebastian's eyes met hers fully again, and Evelyn realized with sudden frightening certainty that the greatest danger was no longer society at all. It was hope. Rain fell softly across Blackwood Manor the night they returned from London. Not the violent storms of previous weeks. This rain moved gently against the windows like tired fingers against glass. The children had fallen asleep during the carriage ride home after the ball. Lily curled against Lady Margaret's shoulder beneath a velvet blanket while Theo fought exhaustion with visible determination until finally losing the battle somewhere outside the eastern gates. Sebastian carried Lily upstairs himself when they arrived. Theo insisted he required no assistance despite barely remaining awake long enough to remove his shoes. By midnight, the manor had settled once more into silence. Evelyn stood beside the bedroom window staring out at the rain-dark gardens below. Candlelight flickered softly behind her while the events of the evening replayed endlessly through her mind. Sebastian defending her publicly. The ballroom falling silent. The look in his eyes afterward. Dangerous things had shifted tonight, not only within society, within herself. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Before she could answer, the door opened slightly. Theo stood there in wrinkled nightclothes with his hair thoroughly ruined by sleep. "I apologize for the hour," he said with grave exhaustion. "But Lily is crying." Evelyn's heartbeat tightened instantly. "What happened?" Theo hesitated near the doorway. "Nightmares." He looked younger suddenly beneath the candlelight. More vulnerable. "She keeps asking for you." Evelyn crossed the room immediately without another question. Lily's bedroom glowed softly with firelight when they entered. The little girl sat tangled in blankets near the center of the enormous bed, cheeks flushed with tears and curls hopelessly tangled from restless sleep. Sebastian stood beside the fireplace, still wearing his evening clothes, though his cravat had disappeared sometime during the night. Exhaustion shadowed every line of his face. The moment Lily saw Evelyn, she reached toward her instinctively. "Miss Carter." Her voice trembled softly. Evelyn sat beside the bed at once. "I am here." Lily immediately buried herself against Evelyn's side with desperate sleepy relief. Theo climbed quietly into the armchair near the window, pretending not to look worried. Sebastian remained motionless beside the fire, watching all of it unfold with unreadable intensity. "Did you have a frightening dream?" Evelyn asked gently while smoothing tangled curls back from Lily's damp forehead. The child nodded against her shoulder. "I could not find anyone." Her small fingers twisted tightly into Evelyn's sleeve. The manor was empty. Evelyn's heart ached instantly. It was only a dream, but it felt real. Sebastian lowered his gaze briefly toward the fire. Something painful flickered across his expression before disappearing again. Theo spoke quietly from the armchair. Lily always has worse dreams after London events. Because society is terrifying, Lily muttered sleepily. That is fair, Evelyn admitted softly. The little girl shifted closer beneath the blankets. Will you stay until I sleep again? Evelyn glanced instinctively toward Sebastian. Their eyes met across the candlelit room. Weariness lived openly in his now. So did gratitude. And fear. Always fear whenever his children reached for her. Of course, Evelyn answered gently. Lily relaxed immediately against her shoulder. Theo visibly did the same from across the room, though he attempted disguise through dramatic boredom. I was not worried, he announced quietly. Naturally not. I merely doubted Father's storytelling abilities. Sebastian exhaled softly through his nose. An unfair accusation considering you interrupted before the ending. The pirate voice lacked conviction. I regret teaching either of you honesty. Lily giggled weakly beneath the blankets. The sound softened something inside the room instantly. Evelyn began brushing gentle fingers through the child's curls, while speaking quietly about meaningless peaceful things. Gardens after rain. Ships crossing oceans beneath moonlight. Lighthouse keepers surviving storms. Theo listened silently from the chair despite pretending not to. Sebastian eventually crossed toward the bed with careful exhaustion weighing down every movement. He sat in the chair opposite Theo near the fire without interrupting the soft rhythm of Evelyn's voice. Minutes passed quietly. Rain whispered against the windows. Firelight flickered gold across the dark blue walls. Lily's breathing slowly steadied against Evelyn's shoulder as sleep finally reclaimed her. Theo lost his battle with exhaustion shortly afterward. His head tilted sideways against the armchair while the book in his lap slipped toward the carpet unnoticed. Evelyn smiled faintly. Sebastian noticed. He seemed to notice every expression she tried hiding now. You should rest, he murmured quietly after several more minutes. Evelyn looked down toward the sleeping child curled against her side. She asked me to stay. And naturally no one in this house refuses Lily anything. The softness beneath his dry tone warmed her unexpectedly. Carefully, Evelyn shifted slightly to settle Lily more comfortably against the pillows. The child stirred faintly but did not wake. Theo remained asleep near the window. Rain continued softly outside. Neither adult moved immediately. The silence between them no longer felt cold. Only intimate. Dangerous in entirely different ways now. Sebastian leaned back slightly in the chair across from her. Candlelight cast shifting shadows across his face, softening the severity that usually guarded him from the world. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Evelyn blinked softly. For what? For asking you to enter this household while expecting nothing from you emotionally. His gaze drifted briefly toward his sleeping children. That was never realistic. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in her chest. Your children are remarkable. They are beginning to love you. The honesty of the statement settled heavily between them. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward Lily's small hand still tangled in her sleeve. That frightens you. Sebastian was silent a moment too long. Yes. The single word carried devastating truth beneath it. He looked exhausted suddenly. Not physically. Emotionally exhausted. Like a man who had spent years holding grief together with bare hands. After Isabella died, he continued quietly, I promised myself I would never allow them to depend entirely on someone who might disappear again. Evelyn looked toward him carefully. And yet, his eyes lifted slowly back to hers. And yet they already do. Neither looked away. Rain moved softly against the windows while firelight danced across sleeping children between them. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat now. Dangerous. Unsteady. Sebastian's voice lowered further. Theo watches you every time you leave a room. His expression softened painfully. And Lily sleeps peacefully for the first time in years whenever you are near. Emotion caught sharply behind Evelyn's ribs. Sebastian. It was the first time she had spoken his name aloud. The effect was immediate. His entire expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not shock. Something deeper. More vulnerable. The room seemed to still around them. Evelyn realized what she had done only after silence settled heavily between them. Heat rose instantly to her cheeks. "I apologize. I did not mean—" "Do not apologize." His voice remained quiet, steady, yet something raw lived beneath it now. Sebastian looked at her as though the sound of his name in her voice had reached somewhere dangerously unguarded inside him. Then Lily moved suddenly in her sleep. Her small fingers tightened instinctively around Evelyn's hand. "Mama," she whispered softly against the pillow. The world stopped. Completely. Theo remained asleep near the window unaware. Rain continued beyond the glass. Fire crackled gently inside the hearth. Yet inside the room itself, silence crashed down with enough force to steal breath from Evelyn's lungs. Lily sighed faintly in her sleep and curled closer toward Evelyn beneath the blankets. "Mama!" The word shattered something inside Sebastian's face. Evelyn saw it happen in real time. Shock first, then grief so deep it nearly hollowed the air from the room entirely. His eyes closed briefly as though physically wounded by the sound. When they opened again, emotion lived there completely unguarded for the first time since she had known him. Love, fear, longing, hope so painful it almost looked unbearable. Evelyn could not breathe properly beneath the weight of it. "She has never—" Sebastian stopped abruptly. His voice had failed him entirely. He looked toward his daughter sleeping peacefully against Evelyn's side, then back toward Evelyn herself. Candlelight trembled softly across his face while every careful wall he had built around his heart seemed suddenly moments from collapse. "I know," Evelyn whispered. Sebastian stared at her for one endless silent moment. Then, very quietly, with emotion roughening every word, he said, "I do not think my family belongs to me alone anymore." The next morning, Blackwood Manor woke beneath tension sharp enough to cut through silence itself. Evelyn felt it immediately the moment she stepped into the breakfast room. Servants moved too carefully. Footmen avoided eye contact entirely. Even the air inside the manor seemed strangely strained, as though the house itself had overheard something dangerous during the night. Theo sat rigidly at the table pretending to read while clearly listening for every sound beyond the corridor. Lily stirred sugar into her tea with dramatic concentration entirely inappropriate for 7 o'clock in the morning. Sebastian stood near the windows holding an unopened letter in one hand. His expression alone told Evelyn something was wrong. Lady Margaret entered seconds later carrying another folded newspaper. "Well," she said grimly, "London society apparently survived the ball after all." Sebastian's jaw tightened. Theo lowered his book immediately. "What happened?" Lady Margaret dropped the newspaper onto the breakfast table. Evelyn looked down instinctively. The headline itself remained harmless enough. Discussions of Parliament. Trade routes. A charity gala scheduled near Mayfair. But halfway down the page, hidden neatly inside the society column, one paragraph froze the breath in her lungs. Rumors continue surrounding the Duke of Blackwood's unexpected attachment to Miss Evelyn Carter, a woman of modest background who has gained unusual influence within the household through remarkable affection from the Blackwood children. Several guests observed Miss Carter encouraging emotional dependency among the heirs during the recent Ashcombe ball. Lady Vivian Ashcombe, long considered the natural companion for His Grace, reportedly remains close to the family despite society's growing confusion regarding the Duke's intentions. Silence settled heavily across the room. Lily looked confused. Theo looked furious. Lady Margaret looked ready to commit social homicide before breakfast. Evelyn folded the paper carefully despite the humiliation burning beneath her skin. Encouraging emotional dependency. The cruelty of the phrase lodged painfully inside her chest because it twisted something pure into manipulation. Sebastian crossed the room slowly. "You will ignore this." Evelyn lifted her eyes toward him. "Your children are being discussed publicly because of me." "No," his voice sharpened immediately. "Because society cannot tolerate kindness without assigning selfish motives to it." Theo slammed his book shut hard enough to startle Lily. "I hate London." "A sensible position," Lady Margaret muttered. Evelyn lowered the newspaper gently onto the table. Lady Vivian spoke to the society writers. The room went very still. Sebastian's expression darkened instantly. "You do not know that." "No," Evelyn answered quietly. "But someone did." Lily looked between the adults anxiously. "What does dependency mean?" Theo muttered. "Something idiotic." "Theo. Sorry." Sebastian took a slow breath before looking toward Evelyn again. "This changes nothing." Yet something in his eyes betrayed uncertainty now. Fear. Not fear of scandal. Fear of what the scandal might do to his children. Evelyn recognized it immediately because she feared the same thing herself. The breakfast that followed felt strained despite everyone's efforts otherwise. Theo refused to stop glaring at the newspaper as though hatred alone might set it on fire. Lily remained quiet for once, watching the adults carefully with growing unease. Sebastian spoke little at all. His silence troubled Evelyn more than anger would have. After breakfast, she escaped toward the eastern gardens beneath gray morning skies heavy with rain. Cold air moved softly through the hedges while damp roses bent beneath gathering mist. For several precious minutes, she walked alone through the gardens trying desperately to steady her thoughts. Foolish woman. Of course society would turn eventually. She had entered the home of one of England's most powerful dukes. She had become beloved by grieving children too quickly. Society could forgive beauty, could forgive ambition, but it never forgave emotional influence. You should not walk alone while upset. Sebastian's voice appeared quietly behind her. Evelyn turned slowly. He crossed the stone path toward her wearing a dark riding coat untouched by rain despite the threatening sky overhead. "I am not upset," she lied softly. Sebastian stopped before her beneath the pale branches of a flowering tree. "You are a terrible liar." Despite everything, the corner of Evelyn's mouth almost moved. Almost. Sebastian studied her face carefully. Vivian denied involvement. "And did you believe her?" His silence answered too clearly. Evelyn looked away toward the rain-dark gardens. "It does not matter. It matters to me." The quiet intensity beneath the statement unsettled her heartbeat instantly. Sebastian stepped closer. "Listen to me carefully, Evelyn." The use of her first name stole her breath for one dangerous second. "You have done nothing except love my children honestly." Emotion tightened painfully behind her ribs. "And now they are suffering for it." "No," his voice sharpened again. "Society is cruel because society fears sincerity. That is not your fault." Rain began softly around them then, fine silver drops drifting through the gardens. Neither moved. "Sebastian." The name escaped more quietly this time, more intimately. His expression shifted immediately. Every wall around him seemed thinner lately, more fragile. "Last night frightened you," she whispered. He looked at her for a very long moment before answering. "Yes." Honesty again. Always devastating when it came from him. "Because Lily called you Mama," he continued softly. And for one impossible moment, it felt natural. The rain deepened slightly around them. Evelyn could barely breathe now beneath the weight of emotion pressing between them. "That should not frighten me," Sebastian admitted quietly. "But it does." His eyes held hers completely. "Because if my children lose you now, I do not know how to survive watching it happen." Before Evelyn could answer, hurried footsteps echoed across the gravel path behind them. A young footman approached looking pale with alarm. "Your Grace." Sebastian turned immediately. "What happened?" "Lady Vivian has arrived unexpectedly." Of course she had. The timing itself confirmed everything. Sebastian's expression hardened into dangerous calm. "Where is she?" "The drawing room, Your Grace." The footman hesitated awkwardly. "She appears rather distressed." Theo's voice interrupted sharply from farther down the garden path. "Good." Everyone turned. Theo stood there beside Lily beneath a large umbrella neither child was using correctly. Lily looked anxious. Theo looked furious enough to challenge Parliament personally. "Theo," Sebastian warned quietly. "She made people say horrible things about Miss Carter." We do not know that. I know it. Theo's eyes shifted toward Evelyn with fierce loyalty burning openly there. And if she hurt Miss Carter, then I dislike her permanently. Lily moved instantly toward Evelyn the moment she reached them. Small fingers slipped into Evelyn's hand with unconscious certainty. Are you sad? She whispered. Evelyn knelt carefully despite the rain dampening her skirts. No, darling. Lily studied her face with heartbreaking seriousness. You look sad around your eyes. Sebastian closed his own briefly for half a second. The child saw too much. Theo crossed his arms tightly beneath the umbrella. If Lady Vivian says unpleasant things again, I intend to become extremely rude. Theo. Father, I am already trying very hard. To Evelyn's astonishment, Sebastian nearly smiled despite the tension surrounding them. Then the expression vanished as quickly as it came. He looked toward the manor in the distance, toward whatever confrontation waited inside. Stay with the children, he said quietly to Evelyn. Sebastian. He paused. Rain moved softly through dark strands of hair above exhausted gray eyes. I should have stopped this sooner, he admitted. Instead, I allowed society to believe your kindness required explanation. His gaze settled on Lily still holding Evelyn's hand. Then Theo standing protectively nearby despite being only 9 years old. Something resolved visibly inside him at that moment. Calm. Final. Dangerous. When Sebastian looked back toward Evelyn, there was no uncertainty left in his expression anymore. No one will speak about you this way again. Then he turned and walked back toward Blackwood Manor through the rain like a man finally done apologizing for his own heart. Lady Vivian waited in the blue drawing room like a queen receiving surrender rather than a guest arriving uninvited during a storm. Rain streaked softly against the tall windows behind her, while silver light filtered through heavy curtains across polished floors. She stood near the fireplace in pale gray silk with gloved hands folded elegantly before her. Composed. Beautiful. Dangerous. Sebastian entered without hesitation. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. For several seconds, neither spoke. Vivian studied him carefully first. You look furious. I am. The calmness in his voice carried far more threat than shouting ever could. Her expression tightened slightly. Then I assume someone showed you the paper. Sebastian crossed the room slowly. You spoke to the society writers. It was not a question. Vivian held his gaze evenly. I attempted to protect your family. By humiliating Evelyn publicly? By warning society not to become attached too quickly. Her own composure sharpened now beneath his silence. Sebastian, everyone sees what is happening except you. Then enlighten me. Vivian exhaled softly. Your children are emotionally vulnerable. They lost their mother. They are clinging to the first woman who made them feel safe again. And women do not always stay. The statement struck harder because it carried truth tangled beside cruelty. Sebastian's jaw tightened visibly. Evelyn is not using them. Perhaps not intentionally. Vivian stepped closer. But affection creates dependency whether she means it or not. Stop! The single word cut through the room instantly. Vivian blinked softly. Sebastian's eyes remained colder than she had ever seen them. You will not speak about her that way again. Silence spread heavily between them. Rain whispered against the windows while fire crackled softly nearby. Vivian stared at him carefully now, understanding dawning slowly beneath her composure. You love her. Sebastian said nothing. That silence answered everything. Vivian looked genuinely wounded for the first time since entering Blackwood Manor. Good God, she whispered. You truly do. Sebastian turned slightly toward the rain-dark windows. I did not intend to. No one ever does. Her voice softened unexpectedly. Sadness touched it now beneath the elegance. I waited for you for years. Sebastian closed his eyes briefly. Vivian, do not pity me. I would rather you insulted me directly. She laughed once beneath her breath, though the sound carried no humor. How ironic. London believed I feared losing your title. Her gaze lifted toward him again. I feared losing your children. Sebastian looked back toward her slowly. They already chose Evelyn long before I understood what was happening. Vivian's expression faltered at last. Tiny. Human. And you! Sebastian thought of Theo defending Evelyn before an entire ballroom. Lily sleeping peacefully against Evelyn's shoulder for the first time in years. The sound of Mama whispered through firelight and rain. The way Blackwood Manor itself no longer felt haunted whenever Evelyn laughed inside it. I think, he said quietly, they taught me how. Upstairs, entirely unaware of the confrontation unfolding below, Lily sat beside Evelyn in the nursery, attempting to teach Theo how to braid ribbon through doll hair. Theo endured the lesson with visible despair. This is impossible. No, you are simply aggressive. I am not aggressive. You snapped the ribbon twice. Evelyn sat nearby pretending to read while secretly watching both children with quiet affection. Rain softened the world beyond the nursery windows. The manor felt strangely suspended today. Waiting. Theo finally abandoned the doll entirely. Father has been downstairs too long. Lily looked up immediately. Do you think Lady Vivian is yelling? No, Theo frowned slightly. Father becomes quieter when truly angry. Evelyn felt her heartbeat tighten faintly. Theo noticed too much for a child his age. Before she could answer, hurried footsteps crossed the corridor outside. Then the nursery door opened. Sebastian stood there motionless beneath the doorway. Rain-darkened shadows still clung faintly to his coat. Yet something fundamental had changed in his expression. The uncertainty was gone. Theo noticed immediately. What happened? Sebastian's gaze found Evelyn first. Completely. Lady Vivian has left Blackwood Manor. Silence settled softly across the nursery. Lily tilted her head. Forever. A faint shadow of sadness crossed Sebastian's face. Yes. Theo looked strangely conflicted despite his dislike for Vivian. Oh! Evelyn rose slowly from the chair beside the window. Sebastian. The children looked between them with growing curiosity. Sebastian crossed the room toward her with calm certainty in every step. I spent years believing protecting this family meant refusing change, he said quietly. Theo and Lily had gone perfectly still now. I thought if I controlled every detail carefully enough, no one else would suffer again. His eyes never left Evelyn's face. But Blackwood Manor was not surviving. We were merely grieving together in silence. Emotion tightened painfully in Evelyn's chest. Sebastian stopped directly before her. Close enough now that she could see exhaustion and hope existing side by side in his gray eyes. Then you arrived. Lily smiled instantly as though hearing the beginning of her favorite story. Theo looked increasingly emotional despite obvious efforts otherwise. Sebastian's voice softened further. You walked into this house while all of us were broken in different ways. His gaze flickered briefly toward his children. And somehow you made my son laugh again. Theo immediately looked horrified by public recognition of happiness. Sebastian almost smiled. You taught Lily that storms were only the sky trying to speak. Lily beamed proudly. Then his attention returned entirely toward Evelyn once more. And you reminded me that grief and love are not enemies. The room had become so quiet Evelyn could hear rain moving gently against distant glass. Sebastian, she whispered. He took one final step closer. I asked you to come here because my children needed stability. His voice lowered, roughened slightly by emotion. I did not understand that I needed you too. Theo made a tiny sound suspiciously close to tears from the corner of the nursery. Lily simply clutched her doll dramatically against her chest. Sebastian reached carefully for Evelyn's hand. I cannot promise a perfect life. His fingers closed gently around hers. Warm, steady. I cannot promise society will always be kind. Emotion blurred the edges of Evelyn's vision unexpectedly. But I can promise this. Sebastian's gaze held hers completely now. Openly. Fearlessly. No one in this world will ever make you feel unwanted inside Blackwood Manor again. Lily sniffed loudly. Theo looked offended by emotional sincerity as a concept. You are both ruining my dignity, he informed the room. Sebastian laughed quietly beneath his breath. Real laughter. Warm enough to dissolve the final lingering shadows from the nursery entirely. Evelyn looked toward the children then. Theo trying desperately not to cry. Lily smiling through openly visible tears. And suddenly she understood something with absolute clarity. She was no longer visiting this family. She belonged to it. Lily solved the moment first by launching herself directly toward Evelyn with complete emotional abandon. "Does this mean you are staying forever?" Theo stood immediately afterward, pretending he absolutely had not also moved closer. Evelyn looked up toward Sebastian once more. The Duke of Blackwood. The man who once believed silence could protect grief forever. Now standing before her with hope visible openly in his eyes at last. "If you still wish it," she whispered softly. Sebastian's expression broke into something beautiful then. Relief. Love. Home. "I have wished it for far longer than I admitted to myself." Lily squealed loud enough to alarm half the manor. Theo covered his face briefly with both hands. "We are becoming emotional disasters." "Yes," Sebastian agreed calmly. "Apparently we are." Downstairs, servants paused in confusion moments later when laughter echoed clearly through Blackwood Manor for the first time in years. Not polite social laughter. Not restrained amusement. Real happiness. Warm and bright enough to reach every silent corridor inside the old estate. Even Lady Margaret looked upward from the drawing room with suspicious moisture gathering in her eyes. "About time," she murmured softly into her tea. Upstairs, rain continued falling gently beyond the nursery windows, while Evelyn stood surrounded by the family that had found her long before she realized she was searching for them too. Theo moved quietly beside her after a moment and slipped one hand carefully into hers. "I knew Father would choose you eventually," he admitted under his breath. Lily nodded proudly. "We chose her first." Sebastian heard them both. The emotion that crossed his face afterward was so raw and full of love that Evelyn felt her heart ache beneath it. He crossed toward them slowly and rested one hand against Theo's shoulder, while Lily wrapped herself around Evelyn's waist again. Then, with the rain fading softly outside and the old manor finally alive around them, the Duke of Blackwood looked at the woman his children had loved first and said the words that changed everything forever. "Welcome home, Evelyn."